Welcome, seekers of destiny, to a tale where the ordinary becomes extraordinary, where hidden bloodlines awaken under moonlit skies, and where true power lies not in what we know about ourselves, but in what we've yet to discover. Meet Sera Blackwood, a woman whose quiet life is about to shatter like glass beneath the weight of ancient magic. She believes herself unremarkable, a small-town librarian whose greatest excitement comes from organizing dusty manuscripts and tending her herb garden. But some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some powers can't remain hidden forever. Tonight, everything changes. Tonight, an alpha wolf will catch her scent on the wind and recognize what she cannot yet see. That ordinary Sera carries the blood of legends, the spark of forgotten magic, and the key to an ancient prophecy that could reshape the supernatural world. Some powers can't stay hidden, and some alphas will risk everything to protect them. Chapter 1. The library felt different tonight. Sera Blackwood pushed a wayward strand of chestnut hair behind her ear as she shelved the last of the evening returns, her fingertips tingling with an odd sensation she couldn't quite name. The Millbrook Public Library had been her sanctuary for 3 years, a place of whispered pages and comfortable solitude, but something electric charged the air tonight, something that made her skin prickle with awareness. Just tired, she murmured to herself, though she felt anything but. Energy thrummed beneath her skin like a live wire, making her restless and strangely alert despite the late hour. Through the tall windows, storm clouds gathered in an unnatural spiral above the town, though the weather forecast had promised clear skies. Sera pressed her palm against the cool glass, watching lightning fork through the darkness in patterns that seemed almost purposeful. The moment her skin touched the window, the glass began to warm. She jerked her hand back, staring at the perfect handprint of condensation that bloomed across the surface, except the moisture seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light that faded even as she watched. Impossible, she breathed, but her heart hammered with recognition she couldn't explain. This wasn't the first strange thing to happen lately. Last week, she'd accidentally shattered a coffee mug just by gripping it too tightly. Yesterday, the wilting roses in her garden had burst into impossible bloom after she'd whispered to them in frustration. And the dreams, God, the dreams of silver eyes and moonlight, of running through forests on 4 legs instead of 2, of power singing in her blood like an ancient song. Thunder crashed overhead, so close the building shook. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the library into velvet darkness. Emergency lighting should have kicked in, but the battery backup remained silent. Sera stood frozen in the blackness, her heart racing. Then, impossibly, she began to see. Not clearly, but enough. Shapes and shadows resolved themselves into familiar furniture, the outline of bookshelves, the pale rectangle of the window. Her vision sharpened with each heartbeat until she could make out individual book spines in the darkness. "This isn't happening," she whispered, but even her whisper seemed to carry too far in the silent space, echoing with strange resonance. A low growl rumbled from somewhere behind her. Sera spun, every instinct screaming danger, but she saw nothing in the stacks. The sound came again, closer now, a predatory rumble that raised every hair on her arms. Her enhanced vision caught movement in the shadows between the shelves, a darkness that moved with purpose and grace. "Hello." Her voice cracked slightly. "The library is closed. You need to." The darkness stepped forward, and Sera's breath caught in her throat. A man emerged from the shadows, tall, broad-shouldered, with midnight black hair and the kind of dangerous beauty that belonged in fairy tales. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart, silver as moonlight, ancient as starfire, and fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring slightly, and something predatory flickered across his features. "Finally," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones. "I've been searching for you, Sera Blackwood. How do you know my name?" She backed toward the circulation desk, her fingers closing around a heavy paperweight.
"Who are you?"
"How did you get in here?" He moved with fluid grace, each step deliberate and controlled. My name is Cade Nightfall, and I'm here because your power called to me. His silver gaze never left her face. You're awakening, and that makes you incredibly dangerous and incredibly precious. I don't know what you're talking about, but even as she spoke, energy crackled along her skin, making the air shimmer around her like heat waves. The paperweight in her hand began to glow with soft, pulsing light. Cade's eyes widened slightly, a mixture of awe and concern crossing his features. You have no idea what you are, do you? He took another step closer, his voice gentling. You're not human, Sera. You never were. The words hit her like a physical blow. That's impossible. My parents lied to protect you. His expression was grave now, urgent. You're a wolf shifter from one of the oldest bloodlines in existence. The Blackwood line was thought extinct, wiped out in the Shadow Wars 3 centuries ago. But somehow, your ancestors survived, went into hiding, suppressed their gifts. He gestured to the glowing paperweight in her hand. Until now. Thunder crashed again, and with it came a sound that chilled her blood, howls echoing through the storm, growing closer by the second. Cade's entire body went rigid, his head tilting as he listened to sounds she couldn't quite catch. They've found us, he said grimly, his silver eyes flashing with something that wasn't entirely human. The Shadowmere Pack. They've been hunting Blackwood descendants for centuries. This is insane, Sera whispered, but the paperweight in her hand pulsed brighter, responding to her fear and disbelief. I'm a librarian. I catalog books and help kids with homework. I don't have any power, and I'm definitely not a... The front door exploded inward. 3 massive shapes bounded through the opening. Wolves, but far larger than any natural predator, with eyes that gleamed red in the darkness. They moved with terrifying intelligence, spreading out to surround her and the mysterious stranger who claimed to know her secrets. Stay behind me, Cade commanded, and Sera watched in shock as his form began to shimmer and blur. Bones cracked and reformed, muscles rippled and expanded, and where the beautiful man had stood, an enormous black wolf now faced their attackers. His silver eyes remained the same, fixed on her with protective intensity. The lead wolf, a massive gray beast with scars crisscrossing his muzzle, spoke in a voice that was barely human. The Blackwood heir will come with us. The alpha wants her power for the pack. Never. Cade's wolf growled, the sound vibrating through the floor. She's under my protection. The scarred wolf laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Your protection means nothing, Nightfall. She doesn't even know what she is. An untrained pup with ancient bloodline power? She'll destroy herself before the week is out, unless we guide her. Guide her? Cade's lips pulled back from razor-sharp teeth. You mean enslave her? Use her power to fuel your dark magic. Terror and confusion swirled through Sera's mind, but beneath it all, something else was rising, something primal and fierce that recognized these wolves as enemies. The paperweight in her hand blazed like a small sun now, and she could feel power building in her chest, pressing against her ribs like caged lightning. Stop, she said quietly, but somehow her voice carried through the library with supernatural force. All of you, just stop. Every wolf in the room froze. The very air seemed to still around her as power rolled off her in waves, making the windows rattle in their frames. Books began to glow on their shelves, responding to the energy pouring from her skin. I don't understand what's happening to me, Sera continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. But I know you're lying. She looked directly at the scarred wolf. You don't want to guide me. You want to use me. I can feel it, your hunger, your greed. It's like a stain on the air. The scarred wolf's eyes widened. Impossible. She shouldn't be able to. Read intentions? Sera's power flared brighter, and every wolf except Cade took an involuntary step back. Feel the truth beneath your words? Maybe I couldn't yesterday, but I can now. She turned to Cade, whose silver eyes held wonder and something that might have been pride. And you're telling the truth, aren't you? About what I am. About the danger. He shifted back to human form in a ripple of moonlight and shadow, standing naked and unashamed in the chaos of her awakening. "Every word," he said simply. "You're awakening to powers that have slept for 300 years. You're the last of the Blackwood line, heir to abilities that could reshape the supernatural world. And yes, that makes you incredibly dangerous to those who would abuse such gifts." The lead Shadowmere wolf snarled, "Enough of this. Take her." They lunged as one, but Sera was ready. Power erupted from her like a nova, a blast of pure silver light that sent all three attackers flying backward through the destroyed doorway. They hit the street beyond with bone-jarring impacts, rolling to their feet with obvious effort. "This isn't over, Blackwood heir," the scarred one called as they retreated into the storm. "The Alpha will have you, willing or not. Your power belongs to the pack." As their howls faded into the distance, Sera collapsed to her knees, the paperweight tumbling from nerveless fingers. The light that had blazed from her skin guttered out, leaving her feeling hollow and strangely cold. Cade was beside her in an instant, pulling his shirt from the floor and wrapping it around her shoulders. "You did beautifully," he murmured, his voice full of gentle pride. "I've never seen such raw power from someone untrained." "I don't feel beautiful," she whispered, leaning into his warmth without thinking. "I feel terrified. And confused. And like my entire life has been a lie." "Not a lie," he corrected softly, his hand stroking through her hair with surprising gentleness. Protection. Your parents, your adoptive parents, they loved you enough to hide you from this world until you were strong enough to face it." Sera looked up at him, taking in the sharp planes of his face. The otherworldly beauty that she now understood wasn't entirely human. "And you? What do you want from me?" His silver eyes held hers, and she saw truth there, complex and layered, but genuine. "To protect you. To help you understand what you are. To stand beside you as you claim the power that's your birthright." He paused, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "And if the fates are kind, to love you as my mate." The word hit her like lightning. "Mate. The other half of my soul," he said simply. "I've waited 2 centuries to find you, Sera. The moment your power began to awaken, I felt it call to mine across half the continent. You're not just any shifter, you're mine. My destined mate, my perfect complement." His eyes darkened with something intense and possessive. "If you'll have me." Before she could respond, another howl echoed through the night, but this one was different. Closer. And it carried a message that made Cade's entire body go rigid with alarm. "What is it?" Sera asked, though she was afraid she already knew. "More coming," he said grimly, pulling her to her feet. The Shadowmere pack was just the beginning. Every supernatural predator within 100 miles will have felt your power spike tonight. They'll all want to claim you, control you, or... He met her eyes. "Destroy you before you become too powerful to stop." Sera felt the truth of his words settle over her like ice. There would be no going back to her quiet life of books and gardens. The power humming beneath her skin wouldn't be hidden again, and those who wanted to exploit it would never stop hunting her. But as she looked into Cade's silver eyes, she felt something else rising alongside the fear, determination, strength, and the first flicker of something that might have been destiny. "Then we'd better figure out how to control this power," she said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "Because I refuse to be anyone's victim." Cade's smile was fierce with approval and something deeper, something that promised protection, partnership, and pleasures she'd never imagined. "My fierce mate," he murmured, and the words sent heat spiraling through her despite everything. "We leave tonight. I know a place where you can train safely, learn to harness your gifts without interference." "And if I say no?" she asked, though she already knew her answer. "Then I'll still protect you with my life," he said simply. "But you'll be fighting this battle with one hand tied behind your back. Your power is incredible, Sera, but untrained, it's as dangerous to you as it is to your enemies." As if to prove his point, the lights throughout the library suddenly blazed back to life, then promptly exploded in showers of sparks as her emotions spiked. In the renewed darkness, her skin began to glow again with that otherworldly light. "Okay, she whispered, staring at her luminous hands in wonder and terror. Okay, yes. Teach me. But even as she spoke, another sound reached them through the storm. The thunder of approaching motorcycles, the howl of hunting wolves, and something else that made the hair on her neck stand on end, the beat of massive wings overhead. Too late, Cade breathed, his eyes fixed on the sky beyond the shattered door. They're all coming. Every faction, every enemy your bloodline has made over the centuries. We have minutes, maybe less. Sera felt power building in her chest again, responding to the threat, but this time it felt different. Wilder, less controlled. Cade, she whispered, fear threading through her voice as silver light began to pour from her skin. I can't stop it. The power, it's too much. I'm going to. The last thing she saw before the world exploded into blazing light was Cade's silver eyes, full of fierce protectiveness and something that looked remarkably like love, as he threw himself between her and the approaching darkness. Then everything went white, and Sera Blackwood's ordinary life died forever in a supernova of awakening power that lit up the night sky for miles around. Chapter 2. Consciousness returned slowly, bringing with it the scent of pine forests and wood smoke, the soft crackle of a fireplace, and the overwhelming awareness that she was no longer in Kansas, or rather, Millbrook. Sera opened her eyes to find herself lying on a plush leather sofa in what appeared to be a rustic cabin's living room. Massive log beams crossed the vaulted ceiling, and floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a vista of snow-capped mountains that definitely hadn't been visible from her small Connecticut town. The last thing she remembered was blinding light, Cade's protective form throwing itself between her and danger, and power exploding from her body like a bomb. You're awake. Cade's voice came from across the room, low and relieved. I wasn't sure. The power surge you experienced was unlike anything I've ever witnessed. She turned to find him sitting in a wooden chair beside the fireplace, still shirtless, his silver eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Concern etched his aristocratic features, but beneath it was something else. Wonder, perhaps, and an intensity that made her pulse quicken despite everything. Where are we? Sera pushed herself upright, surprised to find she felt remarkably well considering she'd apparently exploded with supernatural energy. And how long was I unconscious? My family's ancestral home in the Colorado Rockies, he said, rising with that fluid grace she was beginning to recognize as distinctly non-human. You've been sleeping for 18 hours. Your body needed time to process the awakening. Most new shifters don't manifest power that dramatically on their first emergence. Sera looked down at her hands, half expecting to see them still glowing with silver light. They appeared normal now, but she could feel the energy humming just beneath her skin like a live wire waiting to spark. Did I hurt anyone? In the library, when whatever that was happened. You saved us both, Cade said firmly, moving to sit on the coffee table facing her. Up close, she could see flecks of gold in his silver eyes, and when he reached out to touch her cheek, his fingers were warm against her skin. Your power created a protective barrier that held off 3 different supernatural factions until I could get you to safety. The Shadowmere Pack, a coven of dark witches, and... He paused, his jaw tightening. A group I'd hoped never to face again. Who? The Purebloods, he said grimly. Werewolf supremacists who believe mixed bloodlines dilute the species. They've been trying to eliminate families like yours for centuries, not to steal your power, but to ensure it dies with you. A chill ran down Sera's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Cheerful bunch. They're fanatics, Cade agreed. And they're still out there, along with everyone else who sensed your awakening. Which is why we need to begin your training immediately. Sera stood, moving to the massive windows that looked out over pristine wilderness. The view was breathtaking, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. You keep talking about training, but I don't even understand what I am. Yesterday, I was cataloging books and watering plants. Today, I'm apparently some kind of supernatural weapon with a target on my back. Not a weapon, Cade corrected, his voice gentle but firm. A guardian. The Blackwood line has always been protectors, guardians of the balance between the human and supernatural worlds. Your ancestors could sense threats across vast distances, heal wounds that should have been fatal, and channeled the very elements themselves. As if responding to his words, the fire in the grate suddenly flared higher, and Sera felt a corresponding warmth bloom in her chest. She jerked away from the window, staring at the flames in alarm. "It's responding to your emotions," Cade explained, standing to move behind her. His presence was solid and reassuring, his body heat warming her back even though he wasn't quite touching her. "Fire, earth, air, water, they all recognize you as kin. But you need to learn control, or I'll accidentally burn down half the forest," Sera finished, watching the flames dance higher in the fireplace.
"Great."
"Just great." "Hey." Cade's hands settled on her shoulders, turning her to face him. "You're not alone in this. I'll help you learn control, teach you to harness your gifts safely. My pack, my family, they're the best trainers in North America. We've helped dozens of late-blooming shifters find their balance." "Your pack." Sera realized she knew almost nothing about this man who claimed to be her destined mate. "Tell me about them. About you. If I'm going to trust you with my life, I need to know who you are." Cade's smile was slightly rueful. "Fair enough. I'm the alpha of the Nightfall pack. We're based here in Colorado, though our territory extends through most of the Rocky Mountain region. We're one of the oldest packs in North America, and we've made it our mission to protect shifters who can't protect themselves." "And you?" She studied his face, noting the way shadows seemed to cling to him even in the firelight. "What makes you special among special people?" "I'm a shadow walker," he said simply. "I can manipulate darkness itself, step through shadows, become incorporeal, bend light around myself until I'm invisible. It's a rare gift, even among alphas." His expression grew more serious. "It's also what allowed me to sense your awakening from so far away. Shadow and light are opposite forces. When your power began to emerge, it called to mine like a beacon." "Shadow and light," Sera repeated, understanding beginning to dawn. "That's why you think we're mates?" "Because our powers complement each other." "Partly," Cade admitted, his silver eyes growing warm. "But it's more than that. When I saw you standing in that library, power blazing from your skin like starlight, I felt something I've never experienced in 200 years of existence, completion. Like I'd been missing half of myself without realizing it." 200 years. The number hit her like a sledgehammer. "You're 200 years old? Give or take a decade." His mouth quirked in a self-deprecating smile. "Werewolves age differently than humans. I'm considered to be in my prime by our standards." Sera sank back onto the sofa, overwhelmed. "This is insane. Yesterday, my biggest worry was whether Mrs. Henderson would return her overdue romance novels. Now I'm apparently mated to a 200-year-old shadow-walking werewolf alpha who lives in a mountain fortress." "Not mated yet," Cade corrected gently, sitting beside her. "The bond exists, but it has to be accepted by both parties." "I would never force that choice on you, Sera. Mate bonds are sacred. They only work if both people enter them willingly." Before she could respond, a new voice spoke from the doorway. "Well, well. The Sleeping Beauty awakens." Sera looked up to see a woman in her apparent 30s leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed and expression amused. She had the same otherworldly beauty as Cade, with flowing auburn hair and eyes like emeralds. Power radiated from her in waves, different from Cade's shadow-touched energy, but equally formidable. "Sera," Cade said, rising smoothly, "meet my pack sister, Luna Nightfall." "Luna, this is Sera Blackwood." "The famous last Blackwood heir," Luna said, pushing off the doorframe to approach with predatory grace. "You certainly know how to make an entrance. Half the supernatural world is buzzing about the power surge that lit up the sky last night." "That's comforting," Sera muttered, but she stood to meet the other woman. Something about Luna demanded respect, though there was warmth beneath the predatory exterior. "Luna is our best trainer," Cade explained. "She'll be working with you on basic control techniques, while I handle the political aspects of your situation." "Political aspects?" Sera asked, though she had a sinking feeling she knew what he meant. Luna's smile was sharp as a blade. Every major pack leader, coven head, and supernatural tribunal on the continent wants to meet you, claim you, or eliminate you. Cade's been fielding calls and challenges all morning. Challenges. Mating challenges, Cade said grimly. Other alphas who want to claim the right to court you. Normally, I'd simply refuse them all, but you haven't actually claimed her yet, Luna finished with obvious amusement. Which means according to supernatural law, she's fair game for any alpha strong enough to defeat you in combat. Sera felt power flare along her skin in response to her growing alarm. Absolutely not. No one is fighting over me like I'm some kind of prize. Tell that to Marcus Ironwood, Luna said, her expression growing serious. He's already on his way here with half his pack. Claims that an unclaimed Blackwood heir belongs to the strongest alpha, not some pretty shadow dancer who got lucky. Cade's entire body went rigid, shadows literally gathering around him like living smoke. Marcus Ironwood is a brute and a fool. He thinks raw strength trumps everything else. Who is he? Sera asked, though the name sent an inexplicable chill down her spine. Alpha of the Ironwood Pack, Luna explained. Largest pack in the Pacific Northwest, and Marcus has never met a problem he couldn't solve by hitting it harder. He's also been looking for a powerful mate to solidify his position as regional pack lord. Let me guess, Sera said dryly, feeling power crackle beneath her skin. He thinks I'd make a lovely addition to his collection. Something like that. Cade's voice was deadly quiet. He'll be here by sunset. According to the old laws, I have to at least hear his challenge. And if you refuse to fight him? Sera asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Then he has the right to claim you by force, Luna said bluntly. The old ways aren't pretty, but they're binding on all pack alphas. Sera felt something fierce and wild rising in her chest, making the air around her shimmer with heat. Like hell he does. I don't care about your old laws or traditional challenges. I choose who I'm with, not some testosterone-drunk alpha with delusions of ownership. The fire in the grate exploded upward, sending sparks dancing through the air. The windows rattled in their frames, and Luna's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Well, the auburn-haired woman said mildly, that's impressive. Most new shifters take weeks to manifest elemental response that strong. Most new shifters aren't Blackwood heirs, Cade said, his gaze fixed on Sera with an intensity that made her pulse race. Most new shifters don't carry 3 centuries of suppressed power in their bloodline. Which brings us back to training, Luna said practically. If you're going to face down Marcus Ironwood, and believe me, you will whether Cade fights him or not, you need to learn basic control. Raw power is impressive, but it's useless if you can't direct it. Sera nodded, pushing down her fear and frustration in favor of determination. What do I need to know? Luna's smile was approving. First lesson, shifting. You can't access your full potential while locked in human form. Shifting. Sera's eyes widened. As in, turning into a wolf? I don't know how to do that. Your wolf is already there, Cade said gently, moving to stand beside her. She's been waiting for you to acknowledge her existence. Close your eyes, Sera. Listen to your heartbeat. Feel the power flowing through your veins. Can you sense her? Sera closed her eyes reluctantly, focusing inward the way he'd suggested. At first, she felt only her own racing pulse and the energy humming beneath her skin. But then, in the deepest part of her consciousness, she felt something else, something wild and free and utterly, completely hers. Her wolf was magnificent. Silver-white fur that gleamed like moonlight, eyes the color of starfire, and a presence that was both fierce and gentle. She was beautiful, and she was ready to run. I can feel her, Sera breathed, wonder threading through her voice. She's incredible. Let her out, Luna encouraged. Don't fight the change, embrace it. Your wolf knows what to do. Sera took a deep breath and reached for that wild, free part of herself. The shift was unlike anything she could have imagined, not painful, but overwhelming. Her bones lengthened and reformed, Muscles rippled and strengthened, and her senses exploded with new information. She could smell everything. The pine forests outside, the leather of the furniture, the distinct sense of both Cade and Luna. When the transformation completed, she found herself standing on 4 legs, her perspective dramatically lowered. She looked down at her paws, and saw silver-white fur that gleamed in the firelight exactly as she'd sensed. Beautiful, Cade's voice echoed in her mind, and she realized with a start that she could hear his thoughts. "You're absolutely magnificent, my mate. Is this normal?" she asked, surprised that mental communication felt as natural as breathing. The mind link? Between potential mates. Yes. Luna's voice joined the conversation, tinged with amusement. Although it usually takes newly bonded pairs weeks to achieve this level of clarity. Sera patted to the mirror hanging on the far wall, staring at her reflection in amazement. The wolf looking back at her was indeed magnificent, larger than a natural wolf, with an otherworldly grace that spoke of ancient magic. Her eyes were the same silver fire that blazed from her human form when her power manifested. "How do I change back?" she asked, though part of her wanted to run outside and explore the forest on 4 legs. "The same way you shifted," Cade explained. "Reach for your human form and embrace it." The change back was easier this time, leaving her standing naked in the middle of the living room. Cade immediately averted his eyes while Luna tossed her a blanket from the sofa. "Excellent," Luna said approvingly as Sera wrapped the blanket around herself. Most new shifters take several attempts to achieve a complete transformation. "You're a natural." Before Sera could respond, a bone-deep howl echoed through the mountains outside. Wild, challenging, and unmistakably hostile. It was answered by several others, creating a chorus that raised every hair on her arms. "Marcus," Cade said grimly, his form already beginning to shimmer with shadow. "He's early." Luna moved to the window, her expression grim as she peered out at the forest. "He's brought at least a dozen pack members with him. This isn't going to be a simple challenge, he's planning something." "What kind of something?" Sera asked, though she suspected she wouldn't like the answer. "The kind where he tries to claim you regardless of the outcome of any formal challenge," Luna said flatly. "Marcus has never been one to let tradition stand in the way of what he wants." Another howl split the air, closer this time, followed by what sounded like dozens of voices raised in response. The Ironwood pack wasn't just arriving, they were announcing their presence like a conquering army. Sera felt her wolf stir restlessly beneath her human skin, responding to the challenge with fierce protectiveness. Power began to build in her chest, making the air around her shimmer with heat. "Let them come," she said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "I may not understand all this supernatural politics, but I understand bullies. And I'm done being afraid." Cade's silver eyes blazed with approval and something that looked remarkably like desire. "That's my fierce mate," he murmured, and the possessive pride in his voice sent heat spiraling through her despite the approaching danger. But as the howls grew closer and more numerous, Sera couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus Ironwood was bringing more than just a mating challenge to their mountain sanctuary. Something about those voices in the darkness promised violence, and she had the sinking suspicion that her training was about to become a trial by fire. Chapter 3. The Ironwood pack arrived like a storm front, their massive forms emerging from the tree line as the sun touched the mountain peaks. Sera watched from the cabin's main window as wolves the size of small horses padded into the clearing, their eyes reflecting the dying light like red coals. At their head stalked the largest wolf she'd ever seen, easily twice the size of Cade's black form, with fur the color of old bronze and scars crisscrossing his muzzle like battle trophies. "Marcus," Cade confirmed grimly, his own wolf form pacing restlessly beside her. Even in her human shape, she could feel his tension through their growing bond, the way shadows gathered around him in response to threat. "He's brought his entire inner circle." Luna had shifted as well, her wolf form a sleek auburn predator with intelligent green eyes. "This isn't standard challenge protocol," she spoke through the pack link. "He's making a show of force." Through the window, Sera watched as the massive bronze wolf began to shift back to human form. The transformation was impressive. Marcus Ironwood stood nearly 7 feet tall, with shoulders that could have belonged to a lumberjack and muscles that spoke of decades spent in constant training. His hair was the same bronze as his wolf's fur, pulled back in a warrior's knot, and his face was all sharp angles and predatory beauty marred by a network of scars. When his pale blue eyes found her through the window, Sera felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. There was hunger in that gaze and possessiveness, and something else that made her wolf bristle with instinctive warning. "He's looking at me like I'm a piece of meat," she muttered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Because to him, that's exactly what you are." Cade's mental voice was grim. "A prize to be claimed, a source of power to be controlled. He doesn't see you as a person." Marcus raised his voice, his words carrying clearly across the clearing. "Cade Nightfall, I come to claim my right of challenge for the Blackwood heir. Show yourself, shadow dancer, and face me as tradition demands." Several of his pack members shifted back to human form as well, creating a loose circle around their alpha. Sera noted with growing unease that they were all armed, knives, clubs, and what looked like silver-tipped spears that gleamed wickedly in the fading light. "They're expecting a war, not a formal challenge," she observed, her power beginning to stir in response to the threat. "Silver weapons," Luna noted with disgust, "meant to cause maximum damage to our kind. This isn't about honor, it's about intimidation." Cade padded to the door, his massive black form radiating deadly calm. "Stay inside while I speak with him. If this goes badly, I'm not hiding in a corner like a helpless damsel," Sera interrupted firmly. "These are my choices being debated out there. I have a right to face this Marcus myself."
"Sera, no."
Cade's mental voice was sharp with alarm. "You don't understand how dangerous he is. Marcus has killed alphas twice your age and experience. Raw power means nothing if you can't control it." "Then it's a good thing I'm a fast learner," she said, moving toward the door despite his protests. The strange thing was, she didn't feel afraid anymore. Angry, yes. Determined, absolutely. But not afraid. Her wolf was fully awake now, pacing restlessly beneath her human skin and radiating fierce protectiveness for the male who'd claimed them both. "Let her come," Luna said unexpectedly. "She needs to be part of this conversation, and hiding her away will only make Marcus more aggressive. Predators like him see weakness as an invitation." Sera stepped outside before either of them could argue further, the cool mountain air raising goosebumps along her bare arms. She'd barely had time to throw on jeans and a sweater before Marcus's arrival, and she felt underdressed for what was apparently a supernatural summit meeting. Marcus's pale eyes fixed on her immediately, his scarred lips curving in a smile that held no warmth. "So this is the famous Blackwood heir," he said, his voice a rumbling bass that seemed to echo off the mountain walls. "Smaller than I expected." "Size isn't everything," Sera replied coolly, feeling power begin to gather beneath her skin. "Though I'm sure someone with your compensatory issues wouldn't understand that." Several of Marcus's pack members snarled at the insult, but their alpha's smile only widened. "Spirit. I like that in a mate. It makes the breaking so much more satisfying." Cade's shift back to human form was explosive, shadows wreathing his naked body like living smoke as he placed himself between Sera and the Ironwood alpha. "Choose your words carefully, Marcus. She's under my protection." "Your protection?" Marcus laughed, the sound like grinding stone. "You haven't even claimed her yet, shadow dancer. By rights, she belongs to whoever proves themselves strongest." "She belongs to herself," Sera snapped, stepping up beside Cade despite his attempt to shield her. Power crackled along her skin, making the air shimmer with heat. "And she's perfectly capable of speaking for herself." Marcus's gaze sharpened with interest as he took in the display of her abilities. Impressive. Elemental manifestation, so soon after awakening. Your bloodline is even more potent than the old stories claimed. He took a step closer, ignoring Cade's warning growl. "Think of what we could accomplish together, little wolf. My strength combined with your power, we could rule the entire Western territories." "Not interested," Sera said flatly. "I don't date megalomaniacs with anger management issues." You don't have a choice, Marcus replied, his friendly facade dropping away to reveal the predator beneath. I invoke the ancient right of combat. If Cade Nightfall wishes to keep you, he must face me in single combat, wolf to wolf, alpha to alpha, with the winner claiming the prize. And if I refuse? Cade asked, though his stance made it clear he'd already decided. Marcus's smile turned cruel. Then you forfeit all claim to her, and she comes with me willingly or not. The threat hung in the air, like a physical presence. Sera felt her wolf surge forward, power building in her chest until silver light began to pour from her skin. Over my dead body, she snarled, her voice carrying inhuman resonance. I don't belong to either of you. I choose my own path. Brave words, Marcus said, his pale eyes fixed on the light radiating from her form. But power without training is just pretty fireworks. Watch. He gestured, and one of his pack members stepped forward, a lean man with cruel eyes and hands that ended in razor-sharp claws. Without warning, he lunged at Sera with supernatural speed. Sera's power exploded outward instinctively, silver light blazing from her skin in a defensive nova. The attacking wolf hit her barrier of energy and was flung backward with bone-jarring force, crashing into a tree with a sickening crunch. Impressive reflexes, Marcus observed as his pack member struggled to his feet, clearly shaken, but uncontrolled. Wasteful. Under my guidance, you could learn to focus that power, make it truly dangerous instead of merely flashy. Under your guidance, I'd be a prisoner, Sera replied, but she could feel the truth in his words. The defensive burst had drained her significantly. She was already breathing hard, and her legs felt unsteady. Combat will settle this, Cade said firmly, shadows gathering around him like a living cloak. Name your terms, Marcus. The bronze-haired alpha's grin was all teeth. Traditional challenge rules. We fight until one yields or dies. The winner claims the right to court the Blackwood heir. His gaze shifted to Sera, predatory and possessive. And if you try to interfere, little wolf, my pack has orders to subdue you by any means necessary. Several of his followers stepped forward at the threat, silver weapons glinting in their hands. Sera felt Luna's presence beside her, the auburn wolf's mental voice calm but deadly. If they move against you, I'll handle them. Focus on Cade. The two alphas began to circle each other, their forms already shimmering with the approach of transformation. Marcus was physically larger, his muscles bulging with barely contained power, but Cade moved with liquid grace that spoke of centuries of combat experience. This is barbaric, Sera muttered, though she couldn't tear her eyes away from the deadly dance beginning in the clearing. This is justice, Luna corrected grimly. The old ways may be harsh, but they're fair. Strength protects those who cannot protect themselves. Both men shifted simultaneously, their human forms dissolving into their wolf counterparts. Marcus was even more impressive in his animal shape, a bronze giant with fangs like ivory daggers and claws that could shred steel. But Cade was shadow made flesh, his black form seeming to bend light around itself until he was more suggestion than substance. They met in the center of the clearing with a crash that echoed off the mountain walls. Marcus fought like a berserker, all raw power and brutal efficiency, his massive jaws snapping at Cade's throat while his claws raked deep furrows in the earth. But Cade fought like his namesake, a shadow dancer who slipped between attacks like smoke, striking with surgical precision before melting back into darkness. The battle was magnificent and terrible. Both wolves bled from dozens of wounds within minutes, their supernatural healing struggling to keep pace with the damage they inflicted on each other. Marcus's superior size and strength were countered by Cade's speed and his ability to literally disappear into shadow, reappearing behind his opponent to strike at vulnerable joints and tendons. But as the fight progressed, Sera began to see the truth that made her heart sink. Marcus was wearing Cade down through sheer attrition. Every shadow step drained energy, every disappearing act cost precious stamina, while the Ironwood Alpha seemed to have endurance for days. He's losing, she whispered through the pack link, unable to keep the fear from her mental voice. Not yet, Luna replied, but there was tension in her thoughts as well. Cade's fought tougher opponents than this. He just needs to find an opening. But the opening never came. Marcus caught Cade mid-strike, massive jaws clamping down on the shadow wolf's shoulder with crushing force. Cade's howl of pain echoed through Sera's soul, making her stumble as their bond amplified his agony. "Stop," she whispered, power beginning to build in her chest as she watched Marcus shake Cade like a rag doll. "Please, just stop." Marcus flung Cade across the clearing, the black wolf hitting the cabin wall with devastating impact. When he struggled to his feet, Sera could see that his left front leg was hanging at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. The Ironwood Alpha stalked toward his wounded opponent, victory gleaming in his pale eyes. "Yield, Shadow Dancer," his mental voice carried to everyone present. "You fought well, but you're finished. Yield, and I'll let you live to serve in my pack." Cade's response was to bare his fangs and gather shadows around himself for one final attack. But Sera could see the truth in his trembling muscles, the way he favored his broken leg. He had one strike left, maybe two, before his strength gave out completely. "I said stop." Sera roared, power exploding from her body in a column of silver fire that lit up the entire mountain. Every wolf in the clearing, Ironwood and Nightfall alike, was driven to their knees by the sheer force of energy pouring from her slight form. Marcus shifted back to human form, his scarred face alight with triumph and hunger. "Magnificent," he breathed, struggling to his feet despite the pressure of her power. "You'll be even more formidable once I teach you discipline." "You're not teaching me anything," Sera snarled, her voice carrying inhuman resonance as silver light poured from her skin. "This barbaric display ends now." She walked forward, power crackling around her like visible lightning. With each step, the very air grew brighter, warmer, charged with energy that made every supernatural present feel the weight of ancient magic. When she reached Marcus, the bronze-haired alpha was forced to his knees by the sheer pressure of her presence. "You want to claim me?" she asked, her voice soft but carrying enough power to shake the mountains. "Then face me yourself. Not Cade, not anyone else, me. If you can defeat me in single combat, I'll consider your suit." Marcus's eyes widened with surprise and something that might have been respect. "You're untrained," he said, though he made no move to rise from his knees. "Raw power means nothing without control?" Sera smiled, and it was sharp as a blade. "You're right. Good thing I'm a fast learner." She reached out with her power, not the explosive bursts she'd been producing, but something focused and surgical. Silver light wrapped around Marcus like chains, lifting him from the ground until he hung suspended in midair. His struggle against her grip only tightened the bonds of energy holding him. "Here's what's going to happen," Sera continued conversationally, though power continued to pour from her skin like liquid starlight. "You're going to take your pack and leave this mountain. You're going to spread the word that the Blackwood heir is under Nightfall protection, and anyone who wants to challenge that arrangement can come find me personally." "You can't," Marcus began, but his words cut off in a strangled gasp as the energy bonds tightened around his throat. "I can," Sera said simply. "And I will. The old ways work both ways, Marcus. If you have the right to challenge for me, I have the right to defend myself. So here's my challenge to you. Face me, one-on-one, no weapons, no pack support. Win, and you can try to court me, though I should warn you, I don't date men who threaten my friends. Lose." She let the threat hang in the air, unspoken but clear in the way her power pulsed around the suspended alpha. Marcus was many things, but he wasn't stupid. After several long moments, he nodded as much as the energy bonds would allow. "I yield the challenge," he managed through gritted teeth. "The Blackwood heir has proven her strength." Sera released him, letting him drop to the ground with less grace than he'd probably prefer. "Smart man. Now get off my mountain." The Ironwood pack retreated in sullen silence, their alpha's humiliation clear in every line of his massive frame. But as they reached the tree line, Marcus turned back with an expression that promised this wasn't over. "You've made an enemy today, Blackwood heir," he called across the clearing. "I won't forget this humiliation." "Neither will I," Sera replied coolly, power still crackling around her like visible lightning. Remember that the next time you think about threatening my family. Only when the last of the Ironwood wolves had vanished into the forest did Sera allow herself to collapse, her legs giving out as the adrenaline and power drain hit her all at once. Cade caught her before she could hit the ground, his human arms warm and strong despite his own injuries. That, he said with a mixture of pride and exasperation, was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. But effective, Luna added, patting over in her wolf form with obvious relief. Though you've probably just escalated this from a local dispute to a territorial war. Marcus doesn't forgive humiliation. Let him come, Sera said tiredly, leaning into Cade's warmth as exhaustion pulled at her consciousness. I meant what I said. Anyone who wants to threaten my family can come find me personally. Your family? Cade's voice was soft with wonder, his silver eyes searching her face. Sera looked up at him, taking in his aristocratic features, the concern and growing love she could see in his expression, the way he held her like she was something precious despite his own pain. My pack, she corrected gently. My mate. My choice. The smile that spread across Cade's face was radiant with joy. Are you sure? The mate bond is permanent, Sera. Once accepted, it can't be broken. I'm sure, she said, surprised by how true the words felt. I may not understand everything about this world yet, but I understand you. You're good and honorable, and you see me as a person instead of a prize to be won. That's enough to build on. More than enough, Cade murmured, his lips brushing against her forehead in a kiss that sent warmth spiraling through her entire body. My brave, magnificent mate. But even as contentment washed over her, Sera couldn't shake the memory of Marcus's final words. She'd won this battle, but something told her the war was just beginning. And next time, their enemies would come prepared for the power of the last Blackwood heir. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as she nestled closer to Cade's warmth and felt Luna's protective presence nearby, Sera found herself looking forward to the challenge. Let them come. She was done hiding from what she was, done apologizing for her strength. The Blackwood heir had finally awakened, and she intended to make the supernatural world remember why her bloodline had been both feared and revered for over 1,000 years. Chapter 4. Dawn painted the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and rose, but Sera barely noticed the spectacular sunrise. She'd spent the night curled against Cade's side on the massive sofa, listening to his heartbeat and trying to process the earth-shattering changes that had transformed her life in less than 48 hours. The mate bond hummed between them like a living thing, warm, comforting, and surprisingly intimate. She could feel Cade's emotions as clearly as her own, contentment at having her close, lingering pain from his injuries, and underneath it all, a fierce protectiveness that made her wolf purr with satisfaction. You're awake, he murmured without opening his eyes, his arm tightening around her waist. I can feel your thoughts spinning. Hard not to think when my entire worldview has been turned upside down, Sera replied, tilting her head to study his profile in the morning light. Even with healing scratches marking his face and his left arm bound in a sling, Cade was devastatingly beautiful. How's the shoulder? Mending. He opened his silver eyes, and she saw satisfaction there alongside the lingering pain. Werewolf healing is remarkable. I'll be fully recovered within a few days. Though I have to admit, watching my mate face down Marcus Ironwood was worth every broken bone. Your mate, Sera repeated, testing the words. They felt right in a way that still surprised her. I keep expecting to wake up and find this was all some elaborate dream. If it is, I hope we never wake up, Cade said softly, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. I've waited 2 centuries for you, Sera. I'd wait 2 more if necessary. The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight with emotion. She was saved from having to respond by Luna's arrival, the auburn-haired woman carrying a tray of coffee and what smelled like fresh-baked muffins. Good morning, lovebirds, Luna said with obvious amusement. I hate to interrupt the bonding moment, but we have problems that require immediate attention. Sera reluctantly disentangled herself from Cade's warmth, accepting a steaming mug of coffee with grateful hands. What kind of problems? The supernatural telegraph, Luna explained, settling into the chair across from them. Your little display last night has been broadcast to every pack, coven, and tribunal from here to the Atlantic. Everyone wants to know about the Blackwood heir who humiliated Marcus Ironwood without breaking a sweat. That's good, right? Sera asked hopefully. Maybe it will discourage other challenges. Or encourage them, Cade said grimly, struggling to sit up with his injured arm. There are always alphas looking to make their reputation by defeating someone powerful. Your demonstration last night painted a target on your back. As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the mountain air, multiple engines, moving fast and with obvious purpose. Luna moved to the window, her expression growing tense. 3 black SUVs, government plates. The Supernatural Regulatory Council is paying us a visit. Government plates? Sera's coffee cup rattled against its saucer as her hands began to shake. There's a supernatural government? More like a supernatural police force, Cade explained, shadows gathering around him despite his injuries. The SRC exists to maintain the balance between our world and the human one. They investigate threats, mediate disputes, and... He paused, his expression growing grim. They eliminate problems that can't be contained. And they think I'm a problem, Sera said, understanding flooding through her with cold certainty. Your power spike last night registered on every supernatural monitoring station on the continent, Luna confirmed. To them, you're either a valuable asset to be controlled or a dangerous weapon to be neutralized. The vehicles pulled into the clearing with military precision, disgorging a squad of individuals who moved with the fluid grace of predators. Their leader was a woman in her apparent 40s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes like chips of ice. She wore a black tactical suit that did nothing to hide the weapons strapped to her thighs and the authority that radiated from her every movement. Director Sera Vale, Cade identified grimly. Head of SRC Field Operations. This is not going to be pleasant. The woman approached the cabin with confident strides, flanked by 2 equally intimidating operatives. When she knocked on the door, it wasn't a request, it was a command. Alpha Nightfall, she called through the wood, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone used to being obeyed. I'm Director Vale, with the Supernatural Regulatory Council. I need to speak with you and your guest about the events of last evening. Cade and Luna exchanged loaded glances before he moved to open the door, his shadows coiling protectively around him despite his injuries. Director Vale, he said with cool politeness. To what do we owe the pleasure? Cut the pleasantries, Nightfall, Vale replied, stepping into the cabin without invitation. Her ice-blue eyes immediately found Sera, studying her with the intensity of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. Miss Blackwood, I presume. You've caused quite a stir in supernatural circles. So I've heard, Sera said, rising to face the woman with as much dignity as she could muster in pajama pants and an oversized sweater. Power stirred beneath her skin in response to the perceived threat, making the air shimmer slightly around her. Vale's eyes sharpened at the display. Impressive control for someone who only awakened 48 hours ago. Your bloodline records indicate significant gaps in documented abilities. We're here to conduct a comprehensive evaluation of your capabilities. Evaluation. Sera's voice carried a dangerous edge that made both Cade and Luna tense. I'm not some lab rat to be poked and prodded. You're an unregistered supernatural with documented Class 5 power manifestations, Vale countered coolly. Under Section 7 of the Supernatural Regulatory Act, you're required to submit to power assessment and registration within 72 hours of emergence. And if I refuse? Sera asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Vale's smile was razor-sharp. Then you become a threat to supernatural secrecy and human safety. Such threats are dealt with permanently. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees as Cade's shadows exploded outward, wreathing him in living darkness despite his injuries. You're threatening my mate in my own territory, he said, his voice deadly quiet. That's an act of war, Director. I'm following protocol, Vale replied, seemingly unimpressed by the display of alpha power. The Blackwood heir's abilities are unprecedented in modern records. Her power signature last night was visible from space, literally. Satellite imagery shows an energy bloom that could have been seen from orbit. Do you have any idea what would happen if humans detected that kind of anomaly? Sera felt ice form in her stomach. In all her worry about supernatural enemies and mate bonds, she hadn't considered the human world that still believed itself alone in the universe. Mass panic, Luna said grimly. Government investigations. Military intervention. The end of supernatural secrecy as we know it. Exactly. Vale's expression softened slightly, showing the first hint of humanity beneath her professional mask. Miss Blackwood, I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to help you understand the responsibility that comes with your abilities. Power like yours can't exist in a vacuum. It has consequences for all of us. Sera sank back onto the sofa, overwhelmed by the implications. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. I didn't ask for any of it. None of us asked for our gifts, Vale said, her voice gentling further. But we have them, and that means we have a duty to use them responsibly. The Council isn't your enemy, Miss Blackwood. We're here to help you learn control, understand your place in the supernatural community, and protect the secrecy that keeps both our people safe. And if she doesn't meet your standards? Cade asked, his protective instincts still radiating through the mate bond. Vale's expression grew grave. Then we'll have to consider other options. But I'm hoping it won't come to that. Miss Blackwood, your bloodline has a long history of cooperation with the Council. The Blackwood family has served as guardians and protectors for over 1,000 years. I'm hoping you'll continue that tradition. What exactly would that involve? Sera asked, though part of her was already drawn to the idea of using her abilities to help others. Training, first and foremost, Vale explained, pulling a tablet from her tactical vest. We have facilities specifically designed for high-powered individuals, with instructors who can help you develop precise control over your abilities. After that, we discuss potential assignments, investigation work, threat assessment, emergency response to supernatural incidents. Like supernatural law enforcement, Sera said, beginning to understand. Among other things, your particular gifts would be invaluable for crisis response. The ability to channel elemental forces, combined with your bloodline's natural empathic abilities, could save countless lives in the right situations. Empathic abilities? Sera looked between Vale and her companions. No one mentioned empathy. You haven't noticed? Luna asked with surprise. Last night, when you faced down Marcus, you weren't just reading his intentions, you were feeling his emotional state. Hunger, possessiveness, the underlying insecurity that drives his need to dominate others. Sera thought back to the confrontation, remembering the sick feeling that had washed over her when Marcus looked at her, the way his twisted emotions had felt like oil on her skin. I thought that was just intuition. Blackwood family gift, Vale confirmed. Emotional resonance that allows you to read the true intentions behind people's words and actions. Combined with your elemental abilities, it makes you nearly impossible to deceive or manipulate. The implications were staggering. If she could feel people's true intentions, identify threats before they became actions, help separate truth from lies in supernatural disputes. I need time to think, Sera said finally. This is all happening too fast. Of course, Vale agreed, though Sera caught a flicker of impatience in her ice-blue eyes. You have 48 hours to make your decision. After that, Council protocol requires direct intervention. Understood, Cade said tightly, his shadows still coiling around him like protective armor. Vale and her team left as efficiently as they'd arrived, but their presence lingered like a storm cloud over the peaceful mountain sanctuary. Well, Luna said with dark humor once the sound of vehicles had faded, your life just got significantly more complicated. Tell me about it, Sera muttered, dropping her head into her hands. 48 hours ago, I was worried about overdue library books. Now I'm apparently a walking weapon of mass destruction with a choice between government service or elimination. Not elimination, Cade said firmly, moving to sit beside her despite his injuries. I won't let them hurt you, no matter what you decide. And start a war between your pack and the SRC? Sera looked up at him with sad eyes. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, he replied simply. I'm offering. You're my mate, Sera. I'd fight the world to protect you if necessary. The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight with emotion, but it also crystallized her decision. No, she said softly. I won't be the reason good people get hurt. If I have these abilities, I should use them responsibly. Vale is right about that much. You're considering joining the SRC? Luna asked with surprise. I'm considering learning control, Sera corrected. If their training can help me master these abilities, if I can use them to help people instead of accidentally endangering them, then maybe it's worth trying. Cade's expression was proud and pained at the same time. You don't have to carry this burden alone, he said gently. Whatever you decide, I'll be beside you. Even if it means leaving your pack, your territory. Sera searched his face, seeing the conflict there between duty and desire. The pack will understand, Cade said firmly. And Luna can handle things here while I'm gone. My place is with my mate, wherever that might be. Damn right it is, Luna added with fierce approval. Besides, someone needs to keep an eye on you too. Left to your own devices, you'll probably accidentally start an international incident before the week is out. Despite everything, Sera found herself laughing. The sound felt good after so much fear and uncertainty, and she realized that somewhere in the chaos of the past 2 days, these people had become her family.
Her pack.
Her anchor in a world gone mad. All right, she said, decision crystallizing with surprising certainty. I'll do it. I'll go with the SRC, learn control, try to use these abilities responsibly. But I have conditions. Name them, Cade said immediately. You come with me, both of you. She looked between Cade and Luna, seeing family in both their faces. I'm not facing this alone, and I'm not losing the only stability I've found in this insane new world. Wherever you go, we go, Luna agreed without hesitation. Pack loyalty works both ways. Cade's smile was radiant with love and pride. Together, then. Whatever comes next, we face it as a family. As if responding to the strength of their bond, power stirred gently beneath Sera's skin. Not the explosive, uncontrolled surges of the past few days, but something warm and steady and completely hers. For the first time since her awakening, she felt truly in control of the energy that coursed through her veins. Together, she agreed, reaching out to take both their hands. The moment their fingers touched, she felt the mate bond with Cade strengthen and a new connection form with Luna, pack bonds that would endure whatever trials lay ahead. But even as contentment settled over her, Sera couldn't shake the feeling that their real challenges were just beginning. The SRC training would test her in ways she couldn't imagine, and somewhere out there, Marcus Ironwood and others like him were plotting revenge against the Blackwood heir who had dared to defy them. Let them come, she thought with newfound confidence. She wasn't the frightened librarian who had cowered in a dark library anymore. She was Sera Blackwood, heir to ancient power, bonded to a shadow-walking alpha, and protected by a pack that had already proven they'd die for her. Whatever the supernatural world wanted to throw at her next, she'd be ready. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, as she sat surrounded by the warmth of her chosen family, Sera found herself eagerly anticipating the challenge. The Blackwood line had always been guardians and protectors. It was time to claim that legacy and show the world what she was truly capable of. Chapter 5. The SRC training facility looked like something out of a science fiction movie crossed with an ancient castle. Located in the remote mountains of Montana, the compound sprawled across several acres of reinforced concrete and gleaming steel, all nestled within walls that hummed with protective enchantments. Guard towers rose at regular intervals, manned by figures whose glowing eyes suggested they weren't entirely human. Welcome to Shadowmere Academy, Director Vale announced as their helicopter settled onto a landing pad marked with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when Sera looked at them directly. Home to the most comprehensive supernatural training program in North America. Sera climbed out of the aircraft on unsteady legs, her stomach churning from both the flight and the overwhelming psychic pressure emanating from the facility. Every supernatural sense she was still learning to control screamed warnings about the concentrated power contained within those walls. It feels like a prison, she murmured to Cade, who emerged from the helicopter with shadows already gathering protectively around him. In some ways, it is, he replied grimly, his silver eyes scanning the fortified perimeter with obvious unease. Very few people leave here unchanged. Luna dropped down beside them, her auburn hair whipping in the rotor wash as the helicopter powered down. Cheerful, she commented, but Sera could feel the older woman's tension through their growing pack bond. Remind me again why we thought this was a good idea? Before Sera could answer, a new voice cut through the mountain air, smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. Because the alternative is being hunted by every supernatural faction on the continent until they either claim you or kill you. The implications were staggering. If she could feel people's true intentions, identify threats before they became actions, help separate truth from lies in supernatural disputes. I need time to think, Sera said finally. This is all happening too fast. Of course, Vale agreed, though Sera caught a flicker of impatience in her ice-blue eyes. You have 48 hours to make your decision. After that, council protocol requires direct intervention. Understood, Cade said tightly, his shadows still coiling around him like protective armor. Vale and her team left as efficiently as they'd arrived, but their presence lingered like a storm cloud over the peaceful mountain sanctuary. Well, Luna said with dark humor once the sound of vehicles had faded, your life just got significantly more complicated. Tell me about it, Sera muttered, dropping her head into her hands. 48 hours ago, I was worried about overdue library books. Now I'm apparently a walking weapon of mass destruction with a choice between government service or elimination. Not elimination, Cade said firmly, moving to sit beside her despite his injuries. I won't let them hurt you, no matter what you decide. And start a war between your pack and the SRC? Sera looked up at him with sad eyes. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, he replied simply. I'm offering. You're my mate, Sera. I'd fight the world to protect you if necessary. The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight with emotion, but it also crystallized her decision. No, she said softly. I won't be the reason good people get hurt. If I have these abilities, I should use them responsibly. Vale is right about that much. You're considering joining the SRC? Luna asked with surprise. I'm considering learning control, Sera corrected. If their training can help me master these abilities, if I can use them to help people instead of accidentally endangering them, then maybe it's worth trying. Cade's expression was proud and pained at the same time. You don't have to carry this burden alone, he said gently. Whatever you decide, I'll be beside you. Even if it means leaving your pack, your territory. Sera searched his face, seeing the conflict there between duty and desire. The pack will understand, Cade said firmly. And Luna can handle things here while I'm gone. My place is with my mate, wherever that might be. Damn right it is, Luna added with fierce approval. Besides, someone needs to keep an eye on you too. Left to your own devices, you'll probably accidentally start an international incident before the week is out. Despite everything, Sera found herself laughing. The sound felt good after so much fear and uncertainty, and she realized that somewhere in the chaos of the past 2 days, these people had become her family.
Her pack.
Her anchor in a world gone mad. All right, she said, decision crystallizing with surprising certainty. I'll do it. I'll go with the SRC, learn control, try to use these abilities responsibly. But I have conditions. Name them, Cade said immediately. You come with me, both of you. She looked between Cade and Luna, seeing family in both their faces. I'm not facing this alone, and I'm not losing the only stability I've found in this insane new world. Wherever you go, we go, Luna agreed without hesitation. Pack loyalty works both ways. Cade's smile was radiant with love and pride. Together, then. Whatever comes next, we face it as a family. As if responding to the strength of their bond, power stirred gently beneath Sera's skin. Not the explosive, uncontrolled surges of the past few days, but something warm and steady and completely hers. For the first time since her awakening, she felt truly in control of the energy that coursed through her veins. Together, she agreed, reaching out to take both their hands. The moment their fingers touched, she felt the mate bond with Cade strengthen and a new connection form with Luna, pack bonds that would endure whatever trials lay ahead. But even as contentment settled over her, Sera couldn't shake the feeling that their real challenges were just beginning. The SRC training would test her in ways she couldn't imagine, and somewhere out there, Marcus Ironwood and others like him were plotting revenge against the Blackwood heir who had dared to defy them. Let them come, she thought with newfound confidence. She wasn't the frightened librarian who had cowered in a dark library anymore. She was Sera Blackwood, heir to ancient power, bonded to a shadow-walking alpha, and protected by a pack that had already proven they'd die for her. Whatever the supernatural world wanted to throw at her next, she'd be ready. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, as she sat surrounded by the warmth of her chosen family, Sera found herself eagerly anticipating the challenge. The Blackwood line had always been guardians and protectors. It was time to claim that legacy and show the world what she was truly capable of. Chapter 5. The SRC training facility looked like something out of a science fiction movie crossed with an ancient castle. Located in the remote mountains of Montana, the compound sprawled across several acres of reinforced concrete and gleaming steel, all nestled within walls that hummed with protective enchantments. Guard towers rose at regular intervals, manned by figures whose glowing eyes suggested they weren't entirely human. "Welcome to Shadowmere Academy," Director Vale announced as their helicopter settled onto a landing pad marked with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when Sera looked at them directly. Home to the most comprehensive supernatural training program in North America. Sera climbed out of the aircraft on unsteady legs, her stomach churning from both the flight and the overwhelming psychic pressure emanating from the facility. Every supernatural sense she was still learning to control screamed warnings about the concentrated power contained within those walls. "It feels like a prison," she murmured to Cade, who emerged from the helicopter with shadows already gathering protectively around him. "In some ways, it is," he replied grimly, his silver eyes scanning the fortified perimeter with obvious unease. "Very few people leave here unchanged." Luna dropped down beside them, her auburn hair whipping in the rotor wash as the helicopter powered down. "Cheerful," she commented, but Sera could feel the older woman's tension through their growing pack bond. "Remind me again why we thought this was a good idea?" Before Sera could answer, a new voice cut through the mountain air, smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "Because the alternative is being hunted by every supernatural faction on the continent until they either claim you or kill you." They turned to see a man approaching from the main building, his movements liquid with predatory grace. He appeared to be in his 30s, with jet black hair, pale skin that seemed to glow in the mountain sunlight, and eyes like emeralds set in ice. Power radiated from him in waves, not the warm, protective energy of Cade's shadows, but something cold and ancient that made Sera's wolf whimper with instinctive fear. "Allow me to introduce Professor Dante Moreau," Director Vale said with obvious respect. "He'll be overseeing Miss Blackwood's training personally." "Professor," Cade said with barely concealed hostility, stepping protectively in front of Sera. "I wasn't aware vampires worked for the SRC." Dante's laugh was like crystal breaking. "Old prejudices, Alpha Nightfall. The Council values results over species bias." Besides, his emerald gaze fixed on Sera with predatory interest. Training someone with Blackwood bloodline power requires specialized expertise. "What kind of specialized expertise?" Sera asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "The kind that comes from being over 800 years old," Dante replied smoothly. "I've trained supernatural talents for centuries, Miss Blackwood, including several members of your illustrious family line." "My family?" Sera's pulse quickened. "You knew other Blackwoods?" "I trained your great-great-grandmother, Elena Blackwood, in 1847, Dante said, his expression growing distant with memory. "Remarkable woman. She had your same combination of elemental gifts and empathic abilities, though her power signature was considerably more controlled." "Elena died fighting the Shadow Wars," Director Vale added. Her sacrifice helped end the conflict between the supernatural factions and establish the current peace accords. The weight of family legacy settled on Sera's shoulders like a lead blanket. So, I'm here to become a weapon for your peace accords. You're here to become what you were born to be, Dante corrected, his ancient eyes holding hers with hypnotic intensity. A guardian, a protector, a force for balance in a world that constantly threatens to tear itself apart. Despite her instinctive wariness of the vampire, Sera found herself drawn to his words. The idea of using her frightening abilities for something meaningful, something that honored her family's legacy, appealed to the part of her that had always wanted to help people. What would the training involve? She asked, ignoring Cade's warning growl. Power control, first and foremost, Dante explained, gesturing toward the imposing fortress behind him. You'll learn to channel your elemental gifts with precision instead of raw force. Mental shielding to protect your empathic abilities from overload. Combat techniques suitable for someone with your unique capabilities. His smile was sharp as a blade. And most importantly, you'll learn to embrace your true nature instead of fearing it. My true nature, Sera repeated, power stirring beneath her skin in response to some unspoken threat in his tone. You're not just any shifter, Miss Blackwood, Dante said, beginning to walk toward the main building with the obvious expectation that they would follow. Your bloodline carries the genetic memory of the first werewolves, the original children of Moon and Shadow, who could command the very elements themselves. Most of that power has been diluted over the centuries, bred out through intermarriage with weaker bloodlines. But in you, he paused, turning to study her with those unsettling emerald eyes. In you, it's awakening in its original form. What does that mean exactly? Luna asked, her protective instincts clearly triggered by the vampire's predatory interest in Sera. It means she's potentially the most powerful supernatural to emerge in over 300 years, Dante replied matter-of-factly. With proper training, she could command not just the elements, but the very forces of creation and destruction themselves. She could reshape reality with a thought, bend the laws of nature to her will, become a force of nature incarnate. The word should have been thrilling. Instead, they filled Sera with bone-deep terror. I don't want that kind of power, she whispered. I just want to help people. Admirable sentiment, Dante said, his expression softening slightly. But one has very little to do with destiny, my dear. You have this power, whether you embrace it or not. The only question is whether you'll learn to control it, or whether it will eventually consume you and everything you care about. As if summoned by his ominous words, power flared along Sera's skin, making the air around her shimmer with heat. Several windows in the nearby building began to glow with the same silver light that poured from her form. Control, Dante said sharply, his voice cutting through her rising panic like a blade. Breathe, center yourself, and pull the energy back into your core. You're bleeding power into the environment, in a place this saturated with supernatural energy that could have catastrophic results. Sera tried to follow his instructions, but the more she fought to contain the power, the more violently it surged. Cracks began to appear in the concrete landing pad beneath her feet, and she could hear glass shattering in the distance as her uncontrolled energy overloaded nearby systems. Sera, Cade's voice cut through the chaos, warm and steady through their mate bond. Look at me, sweetheart. Focus on my voice. She turned toward him desperately, seeing her own fear reflected in his silver eyes along with unwavering love and confidence. I can't control it, she gasped, tears streaming down her cheeks as power continued to pour from her skin. It's too much. I'm going to hurt someone. No, you're not, Cade said firmly, stepping closer despite the dangerous energy crackling around her. You're going to breathe and center yourself, and remember that you're stronger than your power. It doesn't control you, you control it. Listen to him, Luna added, moving to flank Sera's other side despite the obvious danger. We're here with you. You're not alone in this. The warmth of their presence, the steady anchor of her pack bonds, helped Sera find her center. Slowly, carefully, she began to pull the runaway energy back into herself, visualizing it as light flowing back into her core instead of bleeding out into the world. When the last of the silver fire faded from her skin, she collapsed to her knees on the cracked concrete, exhausted and shaking. Impressive, Dante observed clinically. Most untrained supernaturals would have destroyed half the facility with that kind of power surge. Your instinctive control is remarkable for someone so new to their abilities. That was control? Sera asked weakly, accepting Cade's help to stand on trembling legs. Relative control, the vampire corrected. With proper training, you'll learn to channel that energy constructively instead of simply containing it. The power wants to be used, Miss Blackwood. Fighting it will only make it more volatile. Then let's get started, Sera said, determination replacing her fear. The sooner she learned to master these abilities, the sooner she could stop being a danger to everyone around her. Dante's smile was approving. Excellent attitude. We begin immediately. The interior of Shadowmere Academy was even more impressive than its exterior. Ancient stone corridors lined with modern security systems led to training rooms that looked like something out of a fantasy novel. Sera glimpsed vast chambers filled with floating platforms, rooms where gravity seemed to work differently, and what appeared to be an indoor forest complete with weather control systems. Each training environment is designed for specific types of supernatural abilities, Director Vale explained as she led them through the maze of corridors. Elemental manipulation, psychic development, physical enhancement, spell work, we can accommodate virtually any power set. And the students? Luna asked, noting the conspicuous absence of other people in the hallways. Currently we have 47 active trainees, Vale replied. Most are either late bloomers like Miss Blackwood or individuals whose abilities manifested in problematic ways. Problematic how? Sera asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know. Power corruption, primarily, Dante answered. Supernatural abilities can be addictive, especially for those with strong bloodlines. Without proper guidance, many gifted individuals become consumed by their own power. They lose touch with their humanity and become threats to both supernatural and human communities. They passed through a security checkpoint that scanned them with devices Sera didn't recognize, then emerged into what appeared to be a central courtyard. Despite being inside the building, the space was open to the sky, with gardens and flowing water that seemed to exist in defiance of the harsh mountain climate outside. Your quarters, Vale announced, gesturing to a suite of rooms that opened off the courtyard. Professor Morrow felt you'd be more comfortable with private accommodations, given your unique circumstances. The suite was spacious and comfortable, with separate bedrooms for each of them and a common area that looked out over the impossible indoor garden. But despite the luxury, Sera couldn't shake the feeling that they were being housed in a very elegant cage. Training begins at dawn, Dante announced, his pale form seeming to glide rather than walk as he moved through their quarters with obvious familiarity. We'll start with basic power meditation, then move on to elemental channeling exercises. Given the strength of your abilities, I estimate 6 to 8 weeks for basic control, another 3 months for advanced techniques. And then, Cade asked, his protective instincts clearly on high alert around the ancient vampire. Then Miss Blackwood will be qualified for field assignments, Vale replied. Crisis response, supernatural investigation, threat assessment. There's no shortage of ways to put her abilities to good use. Always assuming I survive the training, Sera muttered, sinking into one of the comfortable chairs and trying not to think about all the ways her power could go catastrophically wrong. You'll survive, Dante said with quiet confidence. Blackwood bloodline is remarkably resilient. Though I should warn you, the training will push you to your absolute limits. You'll face challenges that test not just your power, but your character, your resolve, and your ability to make impossible choices. What kind of choices? Sera asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. The kind that separate true guardians from those who merely possess power, Dante replied cryptically. But we'll discuss that when the time comes.
For now, rest.
Tomorrow, your real education begins. After Vale and Dante left them alone, Sera found herself standing at the window overlooking the impossible garden, trying to process everything that had happened. Having second thoughts? Cade asked softly, moving to stand behind her with his warm presence, settling her nerves. Third and fourth thoughts, Sera admitted, leaning back against his solid chest. This place feels wrong somehow, like it's trying too hard to seem welcoming. I noticed that too, Luna said from across the room, where she was examining the suite's security features with obvious suspicion. The whole facility feels like a cage wrapped in silk. Vale seems sincere, Cade mused, his arms sliding around Sera's waist. But that vampire, there's something about him that sets my teeth on edge. Ancient vampires are always unsettling, Luna observed. The question is whether his interest in Sera is professional or personal. Does it matter? Sera asked, turning in Cade's arms to face them both. I need the training. My power is getting stronger every day, and without control, I'm a danger to everyone around me. Then we'll be extra careful, Cade said firmly. We watch each other's backs, trust no one completely, and be ready to leave if this place turns out to be more prison than school. Agreed, Luna said, but her expression remained troubled. I just hope we're not walking into a trap we can't see yet. As if responding to their unease, Sera felt her power stir beneath her skin, not the explosive surges of the past few days, but something more subtle and controlled. Her empathic abilities were picking up something from the facility itself, some underlying current of emotion that felt hungry. She was about to mention it when a new sound reached them through the walls, a scream of pure agony that was abruptly cut short, followed by silence that felt far more ominous than the cry itself. What was that? Sera whispered, power crackling along her skin in response to the perceived threat. I don't know, Cade replied grimly, shadows gathering around him as his protective instincts flared. But I think we just got our first taste of what training really means in this place. The scream echoed in Sera's memory long after the sound faded, a reminder that Shadowmere Academy held secrets far darker than its elegant facade suggested. And tomorrow, she would begin to discover exactly what price the SRC expected her to pay for the power singing in her blood. Chapter 6. Dawn came too soon, and not soon enough. Sera had spent the night alternately dozing fitfully and staring at the ceiling, her enhanced hearing picking up sounds throughout the facility that shouldn't have been possible, whispered conversations in languages she didn't recognize, footsteps that seemed to echo from empty corridors, and underneath it all, a low humming that felt like the building itself was alive. The scream from the night before hadn't been repeated, but its memory lingered like smoke in her consciousness, a reminder that this place held dangers she didn't yet understand. You look terrible, Luna observed with characteristic bluntness as they gathered in the common area for breakfast. Bad dreams. No dreams, Sera replied, accepting a cup of coffee with grateful hands. Just listening. This place is never really quiet, is it? Cade nodded grimly, his own silver eyes showing signs of a sleepless night. Too much concentrated supernatural energy. It creates background noise that most facilities learn to shield against. His expression darkened. The fact that they haven't suggests they either don't care about their students' comfort, or they want us on edge. Before Luna could respond, a soft chime echoed through the suite, followed by Dante's cultured voice over what appeared to be an intercom system. Miss Blackwood, your first training session begins in 30 minutes. Please report to Conditioning Chamber 7 on Sublevel 3. Conditioning Chamber, Luna repeated with obvious distaste. I don't like the sound of that. Neither do I, Sera admitted, but she was already moving toward her room to change into the training clothes that had been provided. But avoiding it won't make my power problems go away. The route to Sublevel 3 took them deeper into the facility than they'd been the day before, through corridors that seemed to grow progressively older and more fortress-like as they descended. The modern amenities of the upper levels gave way to rough stone walls carved with symbols that seemed to writhe in her peripheral vision, and the air grew thick with the weight of centuries and accumulated magic. This part of the building is much older, Cade observed, his shadows instinctively responding to the oppressive atmosphere by coiling protectively around him. Some of these markings date back to the colonial period. The original Shadowmere Academy was built in 1743. Dante's voice came from behind them, making all three jump. The vampire moved with such silent grace that even their supernatural hearing hadn't detected his approach. Founded by a consortium of supernatural families who recognized the need for formal training and power control. Of course, the methods were considerably more direct in those days. Direct how? Sera asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know. Trial by ordeal, primarily. Dante replied conversationally as he led them through a security door that required his palm print and retinal scan to open. Sink or swim, as it were. Students either mastered their abilities quickly or were eliminated before they could become a threat to supernatural secrecy. Eliminated, Luna repeated flatly. You mean murdered? I mean dealt with according to the standards of the time, Dante corrected, his emerald eyes showing no trace of remorse. Fortunately, modern methods are considerably more civilized. They emerged into a circular chamber carved from living rock, its walls lined with crystals that pulsed with inner light. The floor was marked with complex geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow when Sera looked at them directly, and the air hummed with contained energy that made her wolf pace restlessly beneath her human skin. Welcome to Conditioning Chamber 7, Dante announced, his voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space. One of our most advanced training environments, specifically configured for elemental manipulation. It feels like standing inside a battery, Sera observed uneasily, power stirring beneath her skin in response to the charged atmosphere. An apt comparison, Dante agreed. The crystals store and amplify supernatural energy, allowing us to create controlled conditions for power development. They'll also contain any unfortunate explosions while you're learning control. The casual mention of explosions did nothing to ease Sera's growing anxiety, but she forced herself to step forward into the center of the chamber. What do you want me to do? First, we establish your baseline, Dante said, moving to what appeared to be a control panel carved from the same stone as the walls. I want you to manifest your power, not the explosive bursts you've been producing, but a controlled release. Think of it as lighting a candle instead of setting off fireworks. Sera closed her eyes, reaching for the energy that constantly flowed beneath her skin. It responded immediately, silver light beginning to pour from her body with an intensity that made the chamber's crystals flare in sympathetic response. Excellent, Dante murmured, but Sera could hear something else in his voice. Hunger, perhaps, or anticipation. Now, instead of simply releasing the energy, try to shape it. Give it form, purpose, direction. She tried to follow his instructions, visualizing the light as something she could mold like clay. For a moment, it seemed to work. The silver fire flowing from her skin condensed into rough geometric shapes that hung in the air around her like luminous sculptures. Then something went wrong. The shapes began to pulse and expand, growing brighter and more unstable with each passing second. Sera felt control slipping away as the power fed on itself, growing stronger and more chaotic despite her desperate attempts to contain it. Stop, she gasped, but the energy had already passed the point of no return. Silver fire exploded outward from her body with devastating force, and she heard the crystals in the walls screaming as they struggled to contain the blast. When the light finally faded, Sera found herself kneeling in the center of a chamber that looked like a war zone. Several of the crystals had cracked or shattered entirely, and scorch marks decorated the stone walls in patterns that looked almost like writing. Fascinating, Dante observed clinically, making notes on a tablet that had somehow survived the explosion. Your power signature shows remarkable coherence for such raw output. Most untrained elementalists produce chaotic energy bursts. Yours maintains structural integrity, even when out of control. I could have killed you, Sera said shakily, staring at the destruction she'd caused. I could have brought down the whole facility. The chamber's containment systems are designed to handle Class 10 supernatural events, Dante replied dismissively. Your little outburst barely registered as Class 5. Though I admit, the resonance patterns are intriguing. Resonance patterns? Cade asked, his protective instincts clearly triggered by the vampire's casual treatment of Sera's near-catastrophic power loss. The energy's signature her abilities produce, Dante explained, studying his tablet with obvious fascination. Most elemental powers follow predictable mathematical patterns, wave frequencies that can be mapped and analyzed. Miss Blackwood's abilities seem to operate on multiple frequencies simultaneously, creating harmonic resonances that amplify the base power output exponentially. In English, please, Luna requested dryly. Her power doesn't just grow linearly, it compounds, Dante said, his emerald eyes bright with scientific interest. Each time she uses her abilities, they become slightly stronger. And unlike most supernatural gifts, which plateau after reaching maturity, hers appear to have no upper limit. The implications of his words hit Sera like a physical blow. You're saying I'll just keep getting more powerful? Forever. Unless we find a way to establish artificial limits, yes, Dante confirmed. Which brings us to the real purpose of today's session. He moved to another section of the control panel, and Sera felt the chamber's atmosphere change as new systems came online. The damaged crystals began to pulse with a different kind of light, not the warm silver of her own power, but something cold and hungry that made her wolf whimper with alarm. "What is that?" she asked, backing toward Cade and Luna as the strange energy began to fill the chamber. "Suppression field," Dante replied matter-of-factly. A specialized form of magical dampening that can impose limits on supernatural abilities. Think of it as a spiritual straitjacket. It won't eliminate your power, but it will prevent it from growing beyond manageable parameters. Absolutely not, Cade snarled, shadows exploding around him as he stepped between Sera and the vampire. "You're talking about crippling her abilities permanently." "I'm talking about saving her life," Dante countered, his ancient eyes showing the first hint of genuine emotion Sera had seen from him. "And the lives of everyone around her. Without artificial limits, her power will eventually reach critical mass, at which point, she'll either burn herself out from the inside or lose control completely and take half the continent with her." "How do you know?" Sera asked, though she could already feel the suppression field pressing against her consciousness like a physical weight. "Has this happened before?" "Once," Dante said grimly. "In 1887, a young man named Thomas Blackwood manifested abilities similar to yours. We tried to train him using conventional methods, convinced that proper technique would be enough to establish control." His expression grew haunted. 3 months later, he accidentally leveled half of San Francisco trying to stop a minor earthquake. The historical implication hit her like a sledgehammer. The Great San Francisco Earthquake of 1906 was actually in 1887, and it was caused by her great-great-uncle's attempt to help, Dante confirmed. The official records were altered to hide supernatural involvement, but the devastation was very real. Thousands died because we underestimated the danger of unchecked Blackwood power. Sera felt the weight of family legacy settle on her shoulders like a shroud. "So, you want to cripple me to prevent a repeat?" "I want to save you from your own abilities," Dante corrected gently. "The suppression field won't eliminate your power, it will simply establish a ceiling beyond which it cannot grow. You'll still be one of the strongest supernaturals alive, but you won't be a walking apocalypse." "And the cost?" Luna asked suspiciously. "There's always a cost with magical tampering." Dante's hesitation was answer enough, but he eventually replied, "The process is uncomfortable and irreversible. Once the limits are in place, they cannot be removed without catastrophic results." "Define uncomfortable," Cade demanded, his silver eyes blazing with protective fury. "The suppression field must be integrated with her life force at the cellular level," Dante explained reluctantly. "It requires consciousness during the process, and the neural pathways involved in power regulation will need to be restructured." "You're talking about supernatural surgery without anesthesia," Luna said with horror. "That's torture, not treatment." "It's necessary," Dante replied firmly. "Miss Blackwood, you felt how your power grows stronger with each use. In 6 months, you'll be twice as powerful as you are now. In a year, you'll be beyond any hope of control. The choice isn't whether to accept limitations, it's whether to accept them now, while you're still sane, or wait until your abilities drive you mad with their demands." Sera stared at the vampire, feeling the suppression field pressing against her consciousness and her power pushing back in response. The idea of voluntarily crippling her abilities was horrifying, but the alternative, becoming a monster who destroyed everything she touched, was worse. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Time is the one thing we don't have," Dante warned. "Every day you delay increases the risk of catastrophic power surge. I've seen what happens when Blackwood abilities reach critical mass." "I said I need time," Sera interrupted, power flaring along her skin despite the suppression field's influence. "This is my life, my choice. I won't be bullied into surgical mutilation because you're afraid of what I might become." Dante's expression grew cold.
Very well.
"But understand that if you refuse treatment and your power does reach critical mass, the SRC will be forced to take more direct action." The threat hung in the air like a sword as they left the chamber, but Sera was too overwhelmed to process its implications. All she could think about was Thomas Blackwood and the thousands who had died because he tried to help, and the terrible possibility that she carried the same destructive potential in her blood. "He's lying," Cade said firmly as they made their way back to their quarters. "There has to be another way to establish control without permanent mutilation." "Maybe," Luna agreed, but her voice was troubled. "Though if he's right about the power growth pattern, we need to find alternatives fast." "There are alternatives," Sera said quietly, an idea beginning to form in her mind. "Dante keeps talking about artificial limits and technological solutions, but he's ignoring the most obvious option." "Which is?"
Cade asked.
"Natural limits," Sera replied, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "Every supernatural ability in nature has checks and balances, predator and prey relationships that prevent any one species from becoming too dominant. If my power is growing exponentially, there must be something designed to counter it." "You're talking about finding your natural predator," Luna said with alarm. "That's incredibly dangerous." "More dangerous than becoming a walking weapon of mass destruction?" Sera countered. "At least this way, I'd still be me when it was over." But even as she spoke the words, Sera couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial, some piece of the puzzle that would change everything if she could just figure out what it was. The memory of that scream from the night before haunted her, and she had the growing suspicion that Dante's suppression chamber wasn't the only horror hidden in Shadowmere Academy's depths. Whatever was happening here, she was determined to uncover the truth before she let anyone perform supernatural surgery on her soul, even if it meant facing dangers that made her explosive power seem tame by comparison. Chapter 7. That night, Sera made a decision that would have horrified her companions if they'd known about it. She was going exploring. The facility's layout had been nagging at her since their arrival: too many corridors that led nowhere, too many locked doors, and far too much space between the areas they'd been shown and the building's actual dimensions. Shadowmere Academy was hiding something, and given Dante's casual discussion of permanent power suppression and historical eliminations, she suspected whatever they were hiding wasn't good. She waited until well after midnight, when even Luna's restless pacing had finally stilled, before slipping out of her room. The corridors were dimly lit by emergency lighting, but her enhanced night vision made navigation easy. What proved more challenging was avoiding the security systems she could sense humming throughout the building. Her empathic abilities had grown stronger over the past few days, allowing her to detect not just the emotions of living beings, but the psychic imprints left by intense experiences. The facility reeked of fear, pain, and something else she couldn't quite identify, a hunger that felt ancient and utterly alien. Following the strongest concentration of negative emotions, Sera found herself descending far below the training levels they'd visited earlier. The architecture down here was definitely original. Rough stone walls carved with symbols that seemed to pulse with malevolent life, and air thick with the weight of centuries and accumulated suffering. She was 3 levels deeper than she'd thought possible when she heard the voices. Latest batch shows promising responses to the conditioning protocol. A man's voice was saying, clinical and emotionless. Subject 7 achieved full integration in just 48 hours. And the others? That was Dante's voice, confirming her growing suspicions about the vampire's true role at the academy. Standard mortality rates, the first voice replied dismissively. Subject 12 lasted 36 hours before psychological collapse. Subject 3 experienced complete power burnout after attempting to resist the process. Sera pressed herself against the stone wall, her heart hammering as she processed what she was hearing. Subjects. Mortality rates. Conditioning protocols. This wasn't a school, it was a laboratory, and the students were test subjects. What about the Blackwood heir? Dante asked, and Sera felt ice form in her veins. Has she shown any indication of suspecting the true nature of the program? Not yet, the other voice replied. Though her empathic abilities are developing faster than projected, we may need to accelerate the timeline. Understood. Begin preparation for Phase 2 integration. If she won't accept voluntary suppression, we'll simply proceed with involuntary conditioning. Sir, her power levels are significantly higher than previous subjects. The integration process could kill her. Then we'll learn something valuable for the next attempt, Dante replied coldly. The Blackwood bloodline is too dangerous to leave untouched. Better a dead heir than another San Francisco incident. Sera had heard enough. Moving as quietly as she could, she began to retreat back the way she'd come. But her enhanced hearing caught one final exchange that stopped her cold. What about her pack bonds? The unknown voice asked. The Alpha Nightfall and the Luna female will complicate extraction. Then we'll ensure they don't survive the process, Dante replied with chilling indifference. Unfortunate training accidents happen all the time in a facility this dangerous. White-hot rage blazed through Sera's consciousness, and she felt her power respond with terrifying intensity. Silver light began to pour from her skin, threatening to reveal her position, but she managed to contain it through sheer force of will. Cade and Luna were in danger because of her, because they trusted her judgment and followed her into this trap. She had to warn them, had to get them out of here before Dante's Phase 2 could begin. But as she turned to leave, her foot caught on something in the darkness. Looking down, she saw what appeared to be a drainage grate, except instead of water, she could smell the metallic scent of blood and something else that made her stomach turn. Against her better judgment, she pried up the grate and looked down. The sight that greeted her would haunt her nightmares for years to come. Below the grate was a chamber filled with what appeared to be medical equipment, surgical tables, monitoring devices, and tanks filled with glowing fluid that pulsed with unnatural life. But it was the occupants of those tanks that made her bite back a scream of horror. Bodies. Dozens of them, suspended in the glowing fluid like specimens in a museum. Some appeared to be sleeping, their faces peaceful in the artificial twilight. Others showed signs of violent struggle, their features twisted with pain and terror. And all of them were young, teenagers and young adults who should have been living full lives instead of floating in Dante's collection. My God, she whispered, unable to tear her eyes away from the macabre display. What has he been doing to them? Harvesting, a weak voice said from somewhere below. He's been harvesting our power. Sera looked around frantically until she spotted the source, a young woman chained to one of the surgical tables, her body covered in tubes and monitoring equipment. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with dark hair and eyes that burned with desperate intelligence despite her obvious weakness. Who are you? Sera whispered, though she was afraid she already knew. Subject 15, the woman replied with bitter irony. Though my friends used to call me Maya, I was brought here 6 months ago for power evaluation. Turns out they weren't interested in training me. They wanted to figure out how to steal my abilities and transfer them to someone else. Transfer supernatural abilities? Sera felt sick as the implications became clear. That's impossible. Not impossible, Maya corrected weakly. Just incredibly painful and usually fatal for the donor. Dante's been perfecting the technique for decades, using students like us as test subjects. The successful transfers go to the highest bidders, rogue alphas, dark covens, anyone with enough money and flexible ethics. And the failures? Maya's laugh was hollow. Take a look around. We become part of his collection, preserved in case he needs spare parts for future experiments. Sera stared at the tanks. Chapter 8. 3 days after the destruction of Shadowmere Academy, Sera stood on the deck of Luna's family cabin in the Colorado wilderness, watching 24 rescued supernaturals try to rebuild their shattered lives. The remote location provided security and space for everyone to heal, but the challenges of integrating so many traumatized individuals into a functioning group were becoming apparent. "Maya's having another nightmare," Cade reported quietly, joining her at the deck railing. His arms slipped around her waist with comfortable familiarity, and she leaned into his warmth gratefully. "Third one this week," Sera replied, her enhanced hearing picking up the soft whimpers coming from the cabin's guest rooms. Her empathic abilities are stuck wide open. She's picking up everyone else's trauma on top of her own. "Can you help her?" he asked, though they both knew the answer. Sera's own empathic gifts were still developing, and she was already stretched thin trying to provide emotional support for the entire group. "I'm trying," she said tiredly. "But there's only so much one person can do, and we're running out of time. The SRC is going to find us eventually, and when they do..." She didn't need to finish the thought. Director Vale's organization might officially disapprove of Dante's methods, but they certainly wouldn't approve of a rogue pack harboring escaped test subjects either. Especially not when that pack was led by someone they'd already marked as a potential threat. "We could scatter," Cade suggested, though his tone made it clear he didn't like the option. "Break into smaller groups, make it harder for them to track everyone down. And abandon the people who can't protect themselves?" Sera shook her head firmly. "Maya's not the only one whose abilities were damaged by Dante's experiments. Half of these kids can't control their powers, and the other half are too traumatized to function independently. Then we need allies." Luna's voice came from behind them as she stepped onto the deck. "People with resources and influence who can help us establish legitimate protection for supernatural refugees." "Like who?" Sera asked, though she suspected Luna already had someone in mind. "The Conclave," Luna replied, her expression growing serious. "The Council of Alpha Families that predates the SRC by centuries. They have the political influence to challenge the Regulatory Council's authority, especially if we can prove systematic abuse of their mandate. And they'd help us because..." Cade's tone was skeptical. Ancient supernatural politics rarely benefited anyone outside the established power structure. "Because they're already concerned about SRC overreach," Luna explained. "The Regulatory Council was supposed to be a peacekeeping force, not a shadow government. What Dante was doing violates every treaty the Conclave helped establish." Before Sera could respond, a commotion from inside the cabin drew their attention. Raised voices, the crash of furniture, and underneath it all, the distinctive whine of uncontrolled supernatural energy building toward critical mass. They rushed inside to find chaos in the main living area. A young man named Derek, one of Dante's more recent victims, stood in the center of the room with lightning crackling around his hands, his eyes wild with panic and residual trauma. The other survivors had backed against the walls, fear radiating from them in waves that Sera could feel through her empathic abilities. "Stay back," Derek shouted, his voice cracking with adolescent terror. "I can't control it. Every time I try to sleep, I see his face, and the power just..." Lightning exploded from his body, scorching the wooden walls and sending everyone scrambling for cover. Sera felt the familiar buildup of her own abilities responding to the threat, silver fire beginning to pour from her skin in protective response. "Don't," Maya called from across the room, her voice tight with understanding. "Power meeting power will just make it worse. He's not attacking, he's panicking." Sera forced herself to contain her defensive instincts, instead reaching out with her empathic abilities to feel what Derek was experiencing. The terror she found there was overwhelming, not just fear of his own powers, but bone-deep horror at the memory of Dante's experiments, the certainty that he was dangerous and broken and better off dead. "Derek," she said softly, taking a careful step forward despite the lightning crackling between them. "You're safe now. Dante can't hurt you anymore." "But I can hurt them," he replied desperately, gesturing at the other survivors. "I can't turn it off. Every emotion, every nightmare, every time I remember what he did to me, the lightning comes back. I'm a danger to everyone." "No, you're not," Sera said firmly, taking another step closer. "You're healing. Trauma affects our abilities just like it affects everything else about us. But it gets better, I promise." How do you know? Derek's lightning flickered, responding to the hope and desperation warring in his voice. Because I've been where you are, Sera replied honestly. 3 weeks ago, I couldn't light a candle without accidentally setting the whole room on fire. Now look. She held out her hand, allowing a small amount of silver fire to dance across her palm. Controlled, beautiful, harmless. Power isn't the problem, Derek. Fear is. And fear is something we can work with. Slowly, carefully, she extended her consciousness toward his panicked mind, not trying to suppress or control, but simply offering understanding and acceptance. Through their connection, she let him feel her own recent memories, the terror of awakening abilities, the shame of losing control, the gradual journey towards self-acceptance. Derek's lightning began to fade as he felt her empathy, the wild energy settling back into dormant patterns. When the last spark died away, he collapsed to his knees, tears streaming down his face. I'm so tired, he whispered. I just wanted to stop hurting. I know, Sera said gently, kneeling beside him while the other survivors slowly emerged from their hiding spots. But the pain is proof that you survived something horrible. And survival means you get to choose what comes next. What if I choose wrong? Derek asked, looking up at her with eyes that seemed far too old for his teenage face. Then you choose again, Luna said firmly, joining them on the floor. That's what family is for, to help you figure out better choices when the first ones don't work out. Family, Derek repeated wonderingly, as if the concept was foreign to him. Pack, Cade corrected, his voice carrying the weight of ancient traditions. Chosen family bound by loyalty and shared purpose. No one gets left behind. No one faces their demons alone. Looking around the room, Sera saw the same wonder and desperate hope reflected in every face. These weren't just survivors. They were orphans in the truest sense, young people who had been stolen from their families and communities by a monster who saw them as resources to be harvested. They needed more than healing. They needed belonging. All right, she said, decision crystallizing with surprising certainty. If we're going to be a pack, we do it properly. Luna, what do we need to make this official? A recognized alpha bloodline, which you have, Luna replied immediately. Territory, which we can establish. And formal recognition from either the SRC or the Conclave. Her expression grew thoughtful. Given current circumstances, I'd recommend the Conclave route. Huh. How do we contact them? Sera asked. Carefully, Cade said grimly. The Conclave hasn't convened in over 50 years. They only meet when the supernatural world faces existential threats. Like systematic power harvesting by a rogue vampire? Maya suggested weakly, still pale from the emotional upheaval but determined to contribute. Exactly like that, Luna agreed. If we can present evidence of Dante's operations, prove that the SRC either couldn't or wouldn't stop him, the Conclave would have to take action. What kind of evidence? Derek asked, his voice stronger now that he had something to focus on besides his own trauma. Documentation, Sera replied, pieces of a plan beginning to form. Dante's been operating for centuries. There have to be records somewhere. Financial transactions, property acquisitions, maybe even correspondence with other supernatural traffickers.
His lab, Maya said suddenly.
Before he moved operations to Shadowmere, Dante had facilities all over the country. I overheard him talking about backup sites, places where he stored his research data. Do you remember any specifics? Cade asked, shadows already gathering around him in anticipation of action. New Orleans, Maya replied immediately. He mentioned a facility in the French Quarter, something about maintaining the old traditions. And there was something else, a research station in the Pacific Northwest, near the Canadian border. 2 targets, Luna mused. We could split up, cover more ground. No, Sera said firmly. We stay together. Dante's expecting us to scatter, to run and hide like frightened children. Let's surprise him.
How?
Derek asked, lightning flickering briefly around his fingertips before he consciously suppressed it. Sera's smile was sharp as a blade. By doing exactly what he doesn't expect. We go on the offensive. Instead of running from our past, we're going to expose it to the world. The plan that emerged over the next several hours was ambitious, dangerous, and probably suicidal. But it was also the first proactive choice any of them had made since escaping Dante's laboratory, and the psychological impact was immediate. Instead of cowering in fear, the survivors began to stand taller, speak louder, reclaim pieces of the confidence that had been stolen from them. New Orleans first, Sera decided, spreading maps across the dining room table. It's closer, and if Maya's right about the old traditions, there might be evidence dating back centuries. The French Quarter is neutral territory, Cade warned, protected by treaties older than the United States. Any supernatural conflict there could trigger international incidents. Then we don't have a conflict, Sera replied simply. We go in quiet, gather evidence, and get out before anyone knows we were there. And if we run into Dante? Maya asked, unconscious fear threading through her voice. Then we remind him why the Blackwood bloodline was feared for over 1,000 years, Sera said, silver fire dancing briefly around her fingers before settling back into dormancy. I'm done hiding from what I am. But even as she spoke the words with confidence, Sera couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap far more elaborate than anything they'd faced so far. Dante had centuries of experience and resources they couldn't even imagine. The idea that he'd simply abandon his operations and start over seemed increasingly naive. Still, the alternative was accepting defeat and watching more young supernaturals disappear into his laboratories. And that was something she would never allow, no matter the personal cost. We leave tomorrow night, she announced, looking around the room at faces that had transformed from broken victims into determined warriors. Everyone who wants to come is welcome, but I won't force anyone to face their nightmares again. To her surprise, not a single person chose to stay behind. Pack, Derek said simply, echoing Cade's earlier words. No one gets left behind. As the group began making preparations for what might be their final mission, Sera felt the mate bond humming with Cade's love and pride, reinforced by the growing pack connections that linked her to every person in the cabin. They were about to walk into the heart of supernatural darkness, but they would do it together. Whatever Dante was planning, whatever traps waited for them in New Orleans, they would face it as a family. And this time, they wouldn't be running away. Chapter 9. New Orleans in October felt like stepping into another world, one where magic hung thick in the humid air and shadows held secrets older than the nation itself. Sera and her pack of 24 survivors arrived in the French Quarter under cover of darkness, their rented vehicles blending into the steady stream of tourists and night owls that kept the historic district alive 24 hours a day. The address Maya had remembered led them to a narrow building wedged between a jazz club and an antique shop, its weathered brick facade giving no hint of the horrors that might lie within. But Sera's empathic abilities immediately detected the psychic residue of pain and terror that clung to the structure like a second skin. This is it, she said quietly, studying the building from their position across the street. I can feel the emotional imprints, decades of suffering soaked into the very walls. Security? Cade asked, shadows already coiling around him as he prepared for potential conflict. Magical wards, Luna replied, her enhanced senses picking up the subtle distortions that marked supernatural protection. Old ones, but still active. Whoever owns this place doesn't want uninvited guests. Then it's a good thing we're expected, Derek said grimly, electricity crackling briefly between his fingers. His control had improved dramatically over the past few days, fear gradually being replaced by determination and a burning need for justice. Expected. Maya looked at him with confusion. Think about it, Derek continued, his young face set with grim understanding. Dante's not stupid. He knows we survived the academy, knows we'll come looking for evidence. This place is either abandoned or it's a trap. Probably both, Sera agreed, but she was already moving toward the building. Which is why we're going to spring it on our own terms. The front entrance was protected by wards that would have deterred most supernatural intruders, but Sera's Blackwood bloodline gave her advantages that Dante hadn't fully accounted for. Her empathic abilities allowed her to feel the emotional resonance of the protective spells, understanding not just their function but the fear and paranoia that had shaped their creation. He's terrified, she realized with surprise, her consciousness brushing against the psychic signatures woven into the ward work. Dante's afraid of something. These aren't just protective spells, they're hiding places. Afraid of what? Cade asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected the answer. Us, Maya said with dawning wonder. He's afraid of us. Of what we represent. Witnesses, Luna agreed grimly. Proof of what he's been doing. Evidence that could bring down not just him, but his entire network. The realization gave Sera the confidence to push past the wards, her power flowing around the protective spells like water around stones. The magic recognized her bloodline and stepped aside, apparently programmed to admit Blackwood descendants even as it rejected all others. Arrogant, she muttered as the front door swung open at her touch. He never considered that one of us might survive long enough to turn his own protections against him. The interior of the building was a testament to Dante's centuries of supernatural trafficking. The ground floor appeared to be a legitimate antique shop, but Sera's enhanced senses detected hidden passages and concealed storage areas throughout the structure. The real business, she suspected, took place in the basement levels that her empathic abilities suggested extended far deeper than should have been possible. Expansion charms, Cade identified, noting the spatial distortions that marked magically enhanced architecture. This building is probably 10 times larger inside than the exterior would suggest. And probably connected to half the French Quarter through hidden tunnels, Luna added, her expression growing increasingly grim. Perfect for moving supernatural prisoners without detection. They made their way deeper into the building, following the strongest concentrations of psychic trauma toward what had to be Dante's primary operations center. The emotional imprints grew stronger with each level they descended, not just fear and pain, but resignation, the devastating acceptance of people who knew they would never see freedom again. God, Maya whispered, tears streaming down her face as the accumulated suffering hit her damaged empathic abilities with overwhelming force. How many people has he processed through here? Hundreds, Sera replied grimly, her own abilities painting a horrific picture of decades of systematic abuse. Maybe thousands. This place has been operating since before the Civil War. They found Dante's records room 3 levels below street level, behind wards that should have been impenetrable to anyone without vampire blood. But Sera's power had evolved beyond simple elemental manipulation. Her connection to the other survivors created a network of shared abilities that let her draw on Derek's electrical gifts to short-circuit the magical locks, Maya's enhanced empathy to navigate the psychological protections, and the unique talents of every person in their makeshift pack. Impossible, a familiar voice said from the darkness beyond the records room. You shouldn't be able to breach those protections. Dante emerged from the shadows, but he looked different than he had at Shadowmere. Older somehow, his perfect features marred by lines of strain and exhaustion. His emerald eyes held a wildness that suggested recent experiences had pushed even his ancient mind close to the breaking point. Surprised to see us, Professor? Sera asked, silver fire beginning to gather around her as she faced the monster who had tortured her people. I thought you'd be expecting visitors by now. I was expecting frightened children running for their lives, Dante replied, his cultured voice carrying an edge of hysteria. Not this. He gestured at the group surrounding Sera, and she realized what he was seeing that disturbed him so much. They weren't the same broken victims who had escaped his laboratory days earlier. The shared trauma and mutual support had forged them into something new, a unified force that radiated purpose and determination instead of fear. You created us, Derek said, electricity arcing between his fingers with perfect control. Every torture, every experiment, every moment of pain, you were teaching us how to be stronger than you. Stronger? Dante laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Your children playing with forces beyond your comprehension. I've been perfecting supernatural enhancement techniques for centuries. And now you're going to help us destroy them, Maya added, her empathic abilities reaching out to wrap around the vampire's consciousness like chains. We can feel your fear, Dante. You know you've lost. Lost. Dante's expression shifted, the facade of civilized monster finally cracking completely. You have no idea what you're interfering with. The power I've harvested, the techniques I've developed, they're essential for supernatural survival. Survival. Sera stepped forward, her silver fire blazing brighter with each word. You've been butchering children for centuries. How is that survival? Evolution, Dante snarled, his fangs extending as his own supernatural nature asserted itself. Natural selection in action. The weak provide resources for the strong to grow stronger. It's the most basic law of nature. Then let's test that theory, Sera replied, her power exploding outward in a nova of silver flame that filled the entire chamber. But instead of the devastating attack Dante was expecting, Sera's energy flowed around him like water, seeking out the artifacts and equipment that filled the records room. Ancient tomes burst into flame, magical devices overloaded and shattered, and centuries of carefully accumulated research turned to ashen moments. No, Dante roared, lunging toward the burning documents with desperate fury. Those records are irreplaceable. Centuries of work. Exactly, Sera said calmly, her power maintaining the controlled burn that was systematically destroying every trace of his supernatural trafficking network. Your life's work, turning to smoke and ashes. How does it feel to be powerless? Dante's response was to attack with all the fury of a cornered predator. Vampire speed carried him across the chamber in a heartbeat, claws extended and fangs bared as he sought Sera's throat. He never reached her. Derek's lightning caught him mid-leap, sending him crashing into the stone wall with bone-jarring force. Maya's empathic assault hit him while he was stunned, flooding his consciousness with the concentrated fear and pain of every victim he'd ever tortured. And Luna's wolf form materialized from the shadows, massive jaws clamping down on his sword arm with crushing force. Pack, Cade said simply, his own shadows wrapping around the vampire like chains. You always did underestimate the power of people who fight for each other instead of themselves. Dante struggled against their combined assault, his ancient strength and supernatural abilities impressive, but no match for the coordinated efforts of 24 determined survivors. Within moments, he was pinned and helpless, rage and disbelief warring in his emerald eyes. This isn't possible, he gasped, staring at the young people who had turned his own victims into his captors. You're nothing. Damaged goods. Broken toys. We were, Maya agreed, her voice carrying hard-won wisdom. But broken things can be repaired, and scars make you stronger in the right places. You want to know what we learned in your laboratory? Derek added, electricity still dancing around his fingers. We learned that survival isn't about being the strongest or the most ruthless. It's about having something worth fighting for. And people worth fighting with, another survivor added. And the courage to face monsters like you, a third continued. One by one, every person in the room spoke, their voices creating a chorus of defiance that echoed through the chamber. They told Dante exactly what he had created with his centuries of torture, not broken victims, but tempered warriors who understood the true value of freedom. The Conclave will be very interested in your records, Sera said, holding up several documents that had survived the controlled burn. Financial records, property deeds, correspondence with other traffickers, enough evidence to dismantle your entire network. The Conclave hasn't convened in decades, Dante snarled, but there was fear beneath his bluster. They have no authority over me. They will when they see what you've been doing, Luna corrected grimly. The old families may tolerate a lot of things, but not the systematic harvesting of bloodline power. That threatens everyone. Besides, Sera added with a smile that held no warmth, we're not your only problem anymore. As if summoned by her words, new voices echoed from the tunnels above, authoritative, angry, and unmistakably official. SRC Strike Team, Cade identified, his enhanced hearing picking up tactical communications. They found us. Perfect timing, Sera said, her silver fire flickering around the evidence she held. Let's see how Director Vale explains harboring a supernatural war criminal. But even as she spoke, Sera couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something crucial. Dante's operation was vast, his network extensive, but the vampire himself seemed almost relieved to have been caught, as if this had been part of his plan all along. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as she looked around at the faces of her pack, scarred but unbroken, traumatized but determined, Sera felt only fierce pride. Whatever trap they were walking into, whatever game Dante was really playing, they would face it together. And this time, the monsters would be the ones who were afraid. Chapter 10. The conclave had not convened in 57 years, but when it did, the supernatural world took notice. The ancient amphitheater hidden deep beneath the Nevada mountains, filled with representatives from every major bloodline in North America, werewolf alphas whose territories spanned entire states, vampire lords who remembered the founding of the first colonies, fey nobles whose beauty could drive mortals mad with desire, and witch covens whose power had shaped the course of human history from the shadows. Sera stood in the center of the circular chamber, surrounded by the evidence they had gathered from Dante's network over the past 2 weeks. Financial records, property deeds, laboratory notes, and most damning of all, the testimony of nearly 40 survivors who had escaped from facilities across the continent. The scope of the vampire's operation was staggering, a centuries-long enterprise that had harvested supernatural abilities from thousands of victims. The conclave recognizes Sera Blackwood, heir to the ancient bloodline, and speaker for those who survived the trafficking networks, the conclave's speaker announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the amphitheater despite its vast size. Present your evidence. Sera took a deep breath, drawing strength from the pack bonds that connected her to Cade, Luna, Derek, Maya, and all the other survivors scattered throughout the audience. Their shared courage flowed through her consciousness, reminding her that she wasn't facing this alone. Honored elders, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the ancient chamber. For over 3 centuries, Dante Moro has been systematically hunting, capturing, and harvesting supernatural abilities from our people. His victims were primarily young adults from minor bloodlines, people with no political power, no influential families to demand justice when they disappeared. She gestured to the documents spread before the conclave's judgment seat. These records detail at least 6 major facilities, dozens of smaller operations, and financial transactions totaling tens of millions of dollars. Dante wasn't just a rogue vampire acting alone. He was running an international trafficking network that sold stolen supernatural abilities to the highest bidder. A murmur of outrage ran through the assembled representatives, but the speaker raised her hand for silence. These are serious accusations, Miss Blackwood. But accusations require proof beyond mere documentation. How do we know these records are authentic? Because I can verify every entry, Maya said, stepping forward from her place among the survivors. For 6 months, I was Subject 15 in his Montana facility. I watched him harvest abilities from dozens of victims, saw the techniques he used to transfer power from one individual to another. As can I, Derek added, electricity flickering around his fingers as emotion threatened his control. I was Subject 27. The scars on my arms are from the extraction apparatus he used to siphon electrical abilities from other lightning-touched individuals. One by one, survivors stood throughout the amphitheater, each adding their voice to the growing chorus of testimony. They spoke of laboratories hidden in plain sight, of experiments that pushed supernatural abilities beyond their natural limits, of friends and fellow prisoners who hadn't survived the harvesting process. By the time the last witness had spoken, the atmosphere in the chamber had shifted from skeptical interest to barely contained fury. The ancient bloodlines might compete amongst themselves, might scheme and plot and occasionally war, but they protected their own with ferocious intensity. "Where is this Dante Moro now?" asked Marcus Ironwood, the bronze-haired alpha who had challenged Sera weeks earlier. His pale eyes burned with predatory interest as he studied the evidence. "In SRC custody," Sera replied, her expression growing grim. "Director Vale's people arrested him in New Orleans, but I have concerns about their ability to hold him long-term." "Concerns?" the speaker prompted. The Supernatural Regulatory Council has been aware of Dante's activities for decades, Sera said, her words causing another stir of outrage among the assembled representatives. They classified his operations as research and provided him with legitimate cover through facilities like Shadowmere Academy. Impossible, declared a vampire lord from the Eastern Territories, his ancient features set in lines of disbelief. The SRC exists to prevent exactly this kind of abuse. The SRC exists to maintain supernatural secrecy, Sera corrected firmly. And Dante's network was very good at operating below their official notice. As long as his victims came from minor bloodlines with no political influence, the council was content to look the other way. She pulled out another document, Director Vale's own communication logs, obtained during their escape from the academy. These emails show that SRC leadership was fully aware of unusual mortality rates among supernatural training programs. They knew students were dying and chose not to investigate. The revelation sent shockwaves through the conclave. The Supernatural Regulatory Council had been created with the explicit blessing of the major bloodlines, but their mandate was limited to peacekeeping and crisis management. If they had enabled systematic abuse of supernatural citizens, this evidence will need to be verified, the speaker said gravely. If accurate, it represents a fundamental breach of the SRC's charter. More than that, growled a werewolf alpha from the Pacific Northwest. It represents a betrayal of every supernatural family that trusted them to protect our people. What would you have us do, Miss Blackwood? The speaker asked, her ancient eyes holding Sera's gaze with uncomfortable intensity. The conclave has not involved itself in modern supernatural politics for good reason. Our last intervention nearly exposed our entire world to human scrutiny. I'm not asking you to intervene in politics, Sera replied firmly. I'm asking you to protect our people. Dante's network is still operating. We destroyed his research facilities, but the buyers are still out there. Rogue alphas with stolen abilities, which covens enhanced beyond their natural limits, vampire lords who've purchased the power of entire bloodlines. And the SRC? Marcus Ironwood asked, his scarred features twisted with disgust. What of their betrayal? The SRC needs oversight, Sera said carefully. Not destruction, they still serve important functions, but accountability. Independent review of their operations, representatives from the conclave to ensure transparency, and, most importantly, protection for whistleblowers who report abuse. You're proposing to restructure the entire supernatural governance system, the speaker observed. I'm proposing to save it, Sera corrected. Because if we don't act, if we let the SRC continue covering up atrocities in the name of secrecy, eventually the human world will notice. And when that happens, we'll all face consequences far worse than political reorganization. The debate that followed stretched for hours, with representatives from every major bloodline weighing in on the implications of Sera's revelations. Some called for immediate military action against SRC facilities, others demanded the complete dissolution of the Regulatory Council, and a few suggested that the entire matter should be handled quietly to avoid further disruption. But gradually, a consensus began to emerge. The evidence was too extensive to ignore, the abuse too systematic to excuse, and the threat to supernatural secrecy too real to dismiss. Action had to be taken, even if it meant restructuring centuries of established procedure. The conclave will establish an investigative committee, the speaker announced as the debate finally wound down. Representatives from each major bloodline will review SRC operations and implement necessary reforms. Additionally, we will create a new office specifically dedicated to protecting supernatural citizens from abuse, whether by rogues like Dante Moreau or by our own governing institutions. Who will lead this new office? Asked of Faye Noble, her otherworldly beauty making even hardened werewolf alphas stumble over their words. The speaker's gaze found Sera in the center of the amphitheater, and suddenly every eye in the chamber was fixed on her with uncomfortable intensity. The Blackwood bloodline has always served as guardians and protectors, the speaker said formally. Given Miss Blackwood's unique experience with both victimization and resistance, the conclave offers her the position of first guardian, independent oversight of all supernatural law enforcement agencies, with the authority to investigate abuses and protect those who cannot protect themselves. The offer hit Sera like a physical blow. Political power on a level she'd never imagined, resources to help not just her pack of survivors, but supernatural victims throughout the continent, and the authority to ensure that what Dante had done could never happen again. It was everything she dreamed of, and everything she feared. "I need time to consider," she said finally, her voice carrying clearly through the silent amphitheater. "Of course," the speaker agreed. "But understand that time is a luxury we may not have. Dante's trial begins next week, and the media attention will be significant. If we're going to implement reforms, we need leadership in place before the public scrutiny becomes overwhelming." As the conclave session ended and representatives began filing out of the ancient chamber, Sera found herself surrounded by her pack. Their faces reflected the same mixture of pride and concern that she felt herself, pride in what they'd accomplished, concern about the road ahead. "First Guardian," Cade said softly, his silver eyes holding hers with complex emotion. "You'd essentially be the supernatural world's chief law enforcement officer." "Based in Washington," Luna added practically. "Lots of travel, political meetings, testimony before Congress when supernatural issues come up." "Sounds lonely," Maya observed, her empathic abilities picking up the conflicted emotions swirling around Sera's consciousness. "It doesn't have to be," Derek said firmly, his young face set with determination. "Pack means we stick together, right? Whatever path you choose, we choose too." Looking around at the faces of people who had become her family, Sera felt the weight of decisions settling on her shoulders. The position offered incredible opportunities to help people, to prevent future victims, to ensure that Dante's legacy was justice instead of continued suffering. But it also meant leaving behind the simple life she'd been trying to rebuild, accepting responsibility for problems that spanned the entire continent, and potentially putting herself and her pack in danger from forces they couldn't yet imagine. "There's one more thing," she said quietly, pulling out the final piece of evidence they discovered in Dante's records. "Something I haven't shared with the conclave yet." She unfolded a document that had been hidden in the vampire's most secure files, a contract bearing signatures from some of the most powerful supernatural leaders in North America. "Dante wasn't working alone," she continued grimly. "He had clients, people who knew exactly what he was doing and paid him handsomely for stolen abilities, including several members of the conclave itself." The implications were staggering. If some of the same people who had just voted to reform the supernatural justice system were complicit in the crimes they were investigating, what do we do? Maya asked, her voice small with the weight of this new revelation. Sera looked at the document, then at the faces of her pack, then up at the ancient chamber, where representatives of the most powerful supernatural families in North America had just offered her the chance to change everything. "We do what we've always done," she said firmly, silver fire beginning to dance around her fingertips as power responded to her determination. "We fight for justice. We protect those who can't protect themselves, and we refuse to let fear make our decisions for us. Even if it means going to war with the conclave itself?" Cade asked, though his expression made it clear he already knew her answer. "Especially then," Sera replied, her voice carrying the weight of ancient bloodline power and modern moral certainty. "The Blackwood line has always stood against corruption, no matter how powerful or how old. That legacy doesn't change just because the corruption happens to wear familiar faces." As they left the amphitheater, Sera felt the weight of destiny settling around her like a mantle. The real battle was just beginning, and this time the enemies wouldn't be obviously monstrous vampires or corrupt bureaucrats. Chapter 11. 3 weeks after the conclave session, Sera stood in the headquarters of the newly established Office of Supernatural Protection in downtown Washington, D.C., staring out at a city that had no idea how much its world was about to change. The building was a converted federal courthouse, its classical columns and marble halls now serving as the nerve center for supernatural law enforcement reform throughout North America. "The President's Supernatural Affairs Committee wants to meet with you next week," Luna reported, entering the office with a stack of briefings that seemed to grow larger every day. Apparently, Congress is finally ready to acknowledge that the supernatural world exists, and they want official liaisons established. One crisis at a time, Sera replied wearily, accepting the coffee Luna offered with grateful hands. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of political meetings, legal proceedings, and organizational challenges that made her long for the simple days when her biggest worry was overdue library books. "How's Dante's trial proceeding?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer from Luna's grim expression. "Complicated," Luna admitted. "His lawyers are claiming diplomatic immunity. Apparently, he holds citizenship in several European supernatural territories that don't recognize North American jurisdiction. And some of his former clients are providing character references, claiming his research was essential for supernatural medical advancement." "Character references from people who bought stolen abilities," Sera said with disgust. "How is that even admissible?" "Because 3 of those people sit on the conclave itself." Cade's voice came from the doorway as he entered with his own stack of reports. "Marcus Ironwood, Duchess Ravencroft, and Elder Chun have all submitted statements claiming Dante's work prevented supernatural genetic degradation." The revelation hit Sera like a physical blow, though she'd been expecting something like this since discovering the contracts in Dante's files. The corruption went deeper than she'd imagined, reaching into the very heart of supernatural governance. "They're not just clients," she realized with growing horror. "They're investors." Dante's entire operation was funded by conclave members who wanted access to abilities their own bloodlines lacked. "Gets worse," Maya added, appearing in the doorway with Derek close behind. Both of them looked exhausted but determined, their faces bearing the weight of discoveries that had shaken their faith in supernatural justice. "We've been tracking the financial records you asked us to analyze. Dante's network wasn't just harvesting abilities, it was breeding them." Breeding. Sera felt sick at the implications. "Forced mating programs designed to produce children with specific power combinations," Derek explained, his young face set in lines of adult fury. "The kids were raised in isolation, trained from birth to maximize their abilities, then harvested when they reached maturity. Some of those children are still out there," Maya continued, "hidden in facilities we haven't found yet, being prepared for the next round of extractions." The weight of responsibility settled on Sera's shoulders like a lead blanket. Every day they delayed action meant more victims, more children growing up in isolation and fear, more lives destroyed by supernatural greed. "How many facilities are we talking about?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Conservative estimate? 15 to 20 major operations across North America, with satellite locations throughout Europe and Asia," Luna replied grimly. "It's not just a trafficking network, it's an international industry worth hundreds of millions of dollars." Before Sera could respond, her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Miss Blackwood, Director Vale is here to see you. She says it's urgent." Sera exchanged glances with her pack, noting the tension that immediately filled the room. Director Vale's visit could mean many things, none of them likely to be pleasant. "Send her in," Sera said, moving to stand behind her desk as the door opened to admit the steel-haired SRC director. Vale looked older than she had at Shadowmere Academy, her face marked by lines of stress and exhaustion that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. But her ice-blue eyes held the same determination that had made her such an effective law enforcement officer. "Ms. Blackwood," Vale said formally, her gaze taking in the assembled pack with obvious wariness. "I understand congratulations are in order. First Guardian is quite an achievement for someone so new to our world." "Cut to the chase, Director," Sera replied coolly. "What do you want?" "To offer you a deal," Vale said, settling into the chair across from Sera's desk without invitation. "Information about Dante's remaining facilities in exchange for SRC cooperation in your new oversight role." "What kind of cooperation?" Cade asked suspiciously, shadows gathering around him despite the diplomatic setting. "Full transparency," Vale replied, her expression serious. "Complete access to our files, joint operations against supernatural trafficking networks, and shared intelligence on threats to supernatural security. In exchange, your office works with the SRC instead of trying to replace us." It was a tempting offer, and Sera could see the logic in it. The SRC had resources and experience that her new organization lacked, and cooperation would be more efficient than competition. But she could also feel the trap hidden beneath the reasonable words. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked, her empathic abilities picking up currents of fear and desperation beneath Vale's professional composure. Vale's carefully maintained facade cracked slightly. "The trafficking network is bigger than you know," she admitted reluctantly. Dante's operation was just one branch of an international syndicate that's been operating for over a century. Taking him down has made the others more cautious, but it hasn't stopped them. "Others?" Derek asked, electricity flickering around his fingers in response to rising tension. "The Council of Shadows," Vale said grimly. "A consortium of supernatural leaders who believe that might makes right, that the strong should harvest the weak for their own enhancement. They've been funding operations like Dante's across multiple continents, building an army of artificially enhanced enforcers." "Enhanced how?" Maya asked, though her empathic abilities were already providing disturbing insights into Vale's emotions. "Power stacking," Vale replied. "Taking abilities from multiple donors and combining them in single recipients. The results are unstable, but incredibly powerful. We're talking about individuals who can control multiple elements, shift between different supernatural forms, and manipulate reality itself on a localized level." The implications were staggering. If the Council of Shadows had been perfecting power combination techniques for decades, they could have created an army of superpowered enforcers that no single supernatural government could hope to match. "How many?" Sera asked, though she suspected the answer would be worse than her worst fears. "We don't know," Vale admitted. "But intelligence suggests they're preparing for something big, a move against the existing supernatural power structure that would put them in control of every major bloodline territory." "When?" Luna demanded, her protective instincts clearly triggered by the threat to supernatural society. "Soon," Vale said. "Our analysts think the conclave session spooked them. Having their funding source exposed and their operations investigated has forced them to accelerate whatever timeline they were working with." Sera felt the weight of destiny settling around her once again. Every time she thought she understood the scope of the challenges they faced, the picture grew larger and more complex. But looking around at her pack, scarred survivors who had found strength in shared trauma and hope in chosen family, she knew they would face this new threat the same way they'd faced all the others. Together. "What do you need from us?" she asked Vale, decision crystallizing with surprising certainty. "Partnership," Vale replied immediately. "The SRC can't handle this alone, and neither can your new office. But together, with the Conclave's resources and your unique insight into trafficking operations, we might have a chance." "And in exchange?" "Full accountability," Vale said firmly. "Independent oversight of all SRC operations, transparency requirements, and victim advocacy protocols. Everything you asked for at the conclave session, implemented immediately instead of phased in over years." It was more than Sera had hoped for when she'd first accepted the Guardian position, but the cost was higher than she'd ever imagined. Taking on the Council of Shadows meant putting not just herself, but her entire pack in mortal danger from enemies with resources and abilities beyond anything they'd faced before. "I need to discuss this with my people," Sera said finally. "Of course," Vale agreed, rising from her chair with obvious relief. "But don't take too long. Our intelligence suggests the Council is planning their first major move within the next few weeks." After Vale left, Sera turned to face her pack, seeing her own conflicted emotions reflected in every face. "Well," she asked simply. "We're with you," Derek said immediately, his young voice carrying absolute conviction. "Whatever comes next, we face it as a pack. Even if it means war with supernatural forces we can't fully understand." Sera pressed. "Especially then," Maya added, her empathic abilities radiating determination despite the fear lurking beneath. "We've spent our lives being victims of powerful people who thought they could use us, without consequences. Time to show them what happens when their victims fight back." "Pack," Cade said simply, his silver eyes holding Sera's gaze with love and unwavering loyalty. "No one gets left behind. No one faces their demons alone." Looking around at the faces of people who had become her family, Sera felt the last of her uncertainty fade away. They were about to walk into a war against enemies with centuries of experience and resources they could barely imagine. But they would do it together, and that made them more dangerous than any ancient conspiracy or artificial enhancement could ever hope to be. "Then let's get to work," she said, silver fire beginning to dance around her fingers as power responded to her determination. The Council of Shadows is about to learn why the Blackwood bloodline has been feared for over 1,000 years. The hidden power had been revealed at last, and its true strength lay not in any supernatural ability, but in the unbreakable bonds between people who refused to let darkness win. Whatever came next, they would face it as a family. And that would make all the difference. Chapter 12. The Council of Shadows made their move on a Tuesday morning in November, striking simultaneously at supernatural government facilities across 3 continents. But their opening gambit wasn't military, it was political. Sera was in the middle of a briefing with congressional liaisons when every news network in the country suddenly switched to emergency broadcasts. The footage was devastating. Hidden camera videos of Dante's laboratories, complete with audio recordings of him discussing his centuries of supernatural trafficking. But the narrative being presented wasn't the one she'd expected. Sources confirmed that these facilities were operating under the direct oversight of the newly established Office of Supernatural Protection, the news anchor was saying, her face grave with manufactured concern. Questions are being raised about whether this guardian Sera Blackwood was complicit in the systematic abuse of supernatural citizens, or whether she's simply incompetent to hold such significant authority. "That's impossible," Maya breathed, staring at the television screen in horror. "We destroyed those facilities weeks ago. Where did they get this footage?" "From the Council," Sera said grimly, understanding flooding through her as she watched her life's work being systematically destroyed by skillfully edited propaganda. "They've been planning this for months, maybe years. Every move we made against Dante's network was part of their larger strategy." The phone on her desk began ringing with urgent calls from conclave members, congressional committees, and media outlets demanding explanations. But Sera ignored them all, her attention focused on the television screen where more devastating revelations were unfolding. Documents obtained by this network show financial connections between the Office of Supernatural Protection and the trafficking operations, the anchor continued. Bank records indicate payments totaling millions of dollars from accounts linked to Ms. Blackwood's organization to the facilities in question. "Forged," Derek said immediately, electricity crackling around his fingers as rage built in his young chest. "They're framing us for crimes we stopped." "Expertly forged," Cade agreed, shadows gathering around him as his protective instincts flared. This level of fabrication would require resources and technical expertise that only a major organization could provide. Before anyone could respond, Sera's assistant burst through the office doors, his face pale with panic. "Ms. Blackwood, there are federal marshals in the lobby," he reported breathlessly. "They have arrest warrants for you and your entire senior staff." "On what charges?" Luna demanded, her wolf rising to the surface as protective fury blazed in her green eyes. "Conspiracy to commit supernatural trafficking, abuse of authority, and violation of the Supernatural Secrecy Act," the assistant replied. "They're saying you used your position to cover up ongoing trafficking operations while publicly claiming to investigate them." The trap was perfect in its simplicity. The council had waited until Sera's organization was officially established, until she had accepted responsibility for supernatural law enforcement, then used that authority against her by making it appear that she was the real criminal. "We have maybe 5 minutes before they reach this floor," Sera said, her mind racing through options with supernatural speed. "Recommendations." "Run," Derek said immediately. "Get out of the building, go underground, fight this from hiding." "That makes us look guilty," Maya countered, her empathic abilities picking up the complex emotional currents swirling through the building. "Half the people in this building believe the news reports. Running will only confirm their suspicions." "Stay and fight," Luna suggested grimly. "Face the charges, demand a fair trial, expose the council's manipulation through the legal system." "Which they've probably already compromised," Cade pointed out. "If they can fabricate evidence this convincing, they can certainly influence judges and juries." Sera closed her eyes, reaching out through the pack bonds that connected her to every survivor who had escaped Dante's laboratories. She could feel their fear, their rage, their desperate need for someone to trust in a world that seemed determined to victimize them again. "We do what we've always done," she said finally, opening her eyes to meet each of their gazes in turn. "We protect our people, and we refuse to let fear make our decisions." "Meaning?" Derek asked. "Meaning we split up," Sera replied, decision crystallizing with painful clarity. "Some of us stay and fight through legal channels, others go underground and gather evidence against the council. They want to divide us, make us choose between legitimacy and effectiveness. Instead, we'll be both." "I don't like it," Cade said firmly, shadows coiling around him with agitated energy. "Separating makes us vulnerable. Staying together makes us sitting ducks," Sera countered. "Luna, take half our people and establish a secure base of operations somewhere the council can't find you. Derek, Maya, you're with her. Your abilities are too unique to risk losing to federal custody." "And you?" Maya asked, though her empathic gifts were already providing the answer. "I stay," Sera said simply. "Face the charges, work within the system. Keep the council's attention focused on me while you gather the evidence we need to expose them." "Absolutely not," Cade said immediately. "If you're staying, I'm staying. The mate bond doesn't get broken by federal arrest warrants." Before Sera could argue, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors outside, accompanied by the authoritative voices of law enforcement officers carrying out their duty. "Too late to argue," she said, moving to embrace each member of her pack in turn. "Remember, we're not victims anymore. We're survivors and we're fighters, and we don't give up. No matter what they do to us, we don't give up." The office doors burst open just as she finished speaking, admitting a squad of federal marshals in tactical gear. Their leader, a stern-faced woman with graying hair, stepped forward with arrest warrants in hand. "Sera Blackwood, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit supernatural trafficking," she announced formally. "You have the right to remain silent." As the Miranda rights were read and handcuffs clicked into place, Sera caught Luna's eyes across the room. The auburn-haired woman nodded once, understanding passing between them without words. The plan was in motion, the pack was splitting to survive, and the real battle was just beginning. But even as she was led from the building in shackles, surrounded by media cameras and shouting reporters, Sera felt a fierce satisfaction burning in her chest. The Council of Shadows had made one crucial mistake in their elaborate plan. They'd assumed that destroying her reputation would break her spirit. Instead, it had only reminded her why she'd accepted the guardian position in the first place. Not for personal power or political influence, but to protect people who couldn't protect themselves from those who would exploit their vulnerability. The hidden power that had awakened in a small-town library weeks earlier wasn't elemental manipulation or empathic abilities. It was the unbreakable determination of someone who refused to be anyone's victim ever again. Let the council think they'd won. Let them celebrate their careful manipulation and political maneuvering. While they were busy congratulating themselves, Luna and the others would be gathering evidence, building cases, and preparing for the counterattack that would expose their centuries of crimes. The war for the soul of the supernatural world had begun in earnest, and this time, the monsters would discover that their victims had learned not just to bite back, but to coordinate their attacks with devastating precision. As the federal transport pulled away from the courthouse, Sera closed her eyes and reached out through the pack bonds one final time, sending a message that resonated through every consciousness connected to hers. This isn't over. This is just the beginning. The response that came back, dozens of voices united in fierce determination, was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. The Blackwood heir was ready for war, and she wouldn't be fighting alone. 6 months later, the small cafe in Portland, Oregon, looked like any other coffee shop that catered to the city's young professional crowd. Exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and the constant hum of laptops and conversation created an atmosphere of comfortable anonymity. But the woman sitting in the corner booth, her chestnut hair now cut short and dyed auburn, was anything but anonymous. Sera Blackwood had spent the past 6 months learning to hide in plain sight, and she discovered she had a talent for it. The federal charges had been quietly dropped after Luna's evidence exposed the fabricated nature of the council's case, but the political damage had been done. The Office of Supernatural Protection had been disbanded, its authority transferred back to the SRC pending further investigation. On the surface, it looked like the Council of Shadows had won. But appearances, Sera had learned, could be very deceiving. Target confirmed, Derek's voice whispered through the nearly invisible earpiece she wore. Marcus Ironwood just entered the building across the street. "Maya?" Sera asked quietly, her lips barely moving as she pretended to read the newspaper spread before her. "I can feel his emotional signature from here," Maya's voice replied through the communications network they'd established. Confidence, anticipation, and underneath it all, hunger. "He's here to make a purchase." "Luna, are you in position?" Sera continued, her eyes never leaving the building where one of the Conclave's most corrupt members was about to finalize a transaction that would provide the evidence they needed to expose the entire council network. "Ready." Luna's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Surveillance equipment is active, and our legal team is standing by to serve warrants the moment we have confirmation of illegal activity." It had taken months of careful investigation, but they'd finally traced the council's operations to their source, a network of seemingly legitimate supernatural medical research facilities that were actually serving as fronts for continued power, harvesting, and enhancement procedures. Today's operation would either provide the evidence they needed to bring down the entire conspiracy, or expose them to retaliation that could end everything they'd worked for. Movement. Cade's voice joined the conversation, his position on a nearby rooftop giving him perfect oversight of the entire area. 3 vehicles approaching from the north. "Looks like Ironwood brought backup." "Expected," Sera replied calmly. "The council's gotten more paranoid since we started picking off their satellite operations." That was an understatement. Over the past 6 months, Luna's underground network had systematically dismantled 17 facilities across North America, freeing dozens of trafficking victims and gathering evidence that painted a picture of corruption reaching into the highest levels of supernatural society. Each success had made the council more desperate and more dangerous, but it had also made them more likely to make mistakes. Today's mistake would be trusting Marcus Ironwood to handle a high-value transaction without proper security protocols. "Eyes on the package," Derek reported, his enhanced vision picking out details that normal surveillance couldn't capture. "Briefcase, probably containing either payment or product samples." 2 bodyguards, both showing supernatural enhancement signatures. "Enhanced how?" Sera asked, though she was already moving from her position in the cafe toward the predetermined intercept point. "Mixed abilities," Derek replied grimly. "I'm reading electrical, thermal, and kinetic signatures from both individuals. Definitely artificial augmentation." The council's enhanced enforcers were becoming increasingly common and increasingly unstable. Power stacking took a severe psychological toll on recipients, creating individuals with incredible abilities but rapidly deteriorating mental states. Most lasted less than a year before the conflicting energies in their systems drove them to complete madness. "Showtime," Maya announced as Marcus Ironwood emerged from the building, briefcase in hand, and an expression of satisfied greed on his scarred features. "Package acquired, emotional state confirming successful transaction." This was the moment they'd been working toward, proof of an active council leader participating in supernatural trafficking. But as Sera moved to intercept, her empathic abilities picked up something that made her blood run cold. "It's a trap," she said urgently, but even as the words left her lips, she knew it was too late. The building Marcus had just exited exploded outward in a bloom of supernatural fire, the blast wave knocking pedestrians to the ground and shattering windows for 3 blocks in every direction. But this wasn't a random attack. The explosion was carefully contained, designed to destroy evidence while leaving the surrounding area intact enough for emergency responders to operate. "Sera?" Cade's voice crackled through the earpiece, filled with desperate concern. "I'm fine," she replied, picking herself up from behind the overturned car that had shielded her from the worst of the blast. But they knew we were coming. Someone fed them our operational plan. The implications were staggering. Their communication network was compromised, their intelligence sources had been turned, and the council was staying one step ahead of every move they made. How is that possible? Derek demanded, his young voice tight with frustration and betrayal. We've been so careful. Because one of us isn't who they claim to be, Maya interrupted, her empathic abilities finally picking up the deception that had been hidden from them for months. Someone in our inner circle has been feeding information to the council since the beginning. The revelation hit like a physical blow, but before anyone could respond, new voices joined their communication channel, voices they recognized but had never expected to hear again. Hello, children. Dante's cultured tones filled their earpieces, accompanied by what sounded like polite applause. Such impressive work over the past few months. Really, I'm quite proud of what you've accomplished. Impossible, Luna breathed. You're in federal custody. Was in federal custody, Dante corrected pleasantly. Amazing how quickly legal complications can be resolved when you have friends in high places. And I have very high friends indeed. The sound of vehicles approaching from multiple directions reached Sera's enhanced hearing, followed by the distinctive whistle of supernatural abilities being charged for combat. The council wasn't just cleaning up evidence, they were ending the threat her pack represented once and for all. Scatter protocol, she ordered immediately, falling back on contingency plans they'd hoped never to use. Split up, go underground, and don't trust anyone who isn't pack-bonded to you personally. What about you? Cade demanded, shadows already gathering around his position as he prepared to fight his way to her location. I'll handle Dante, Sera replied, silver fire beginning to pour from her skin as ancient power responded to mortal danger. It's time to finish what we started in his laboratory. You're outnumbered 50-1, Maya protested, her empathic gifts picking up the hostile forces converging on their position. Then it's a fair fight, Sera said, her voice carrying the weight of Blackwood bloodline power and 6 months of hard-won experience. The council wanted to eliminate the last heir to an ancient bloodline. Let's give them a chance to try. She stepped out into the street, power blazing around her like a silver storm as enhanced enforcers emerged from every building and alley. In the distance, she could see Dante watching from the safety of an armored vehicle, his emerald eyes bright with anticipation. Last chance to surrender, little heir, he called through supernatural amplification. The council is prepared to offer you a place in the new order we're creating. I've got a counteroffer, Sera replied, her voice carrying to every supernatural in a 3-block radius. Go to hell. The battle that followed lit up the Portland sky like a second dawn, visible from orbit and recorded by dozens of cell phone cameras before supernatural authorities could suppress the footage. But for Sera, surrounded by enemies and cut off from her pack, it felt like coming home. This was what she'd been born for, not politics or bureaucracy or careful negotiations, but standing between innocent people and the monsters who would prey upon them. The hidden power that had awakened in a small-town library had finally found its true purpose. As Silver Fire met the council's enhanced enforcers in a clash that shook the foundations of the city, one thought echoed through Sera's consciousness with perfect clarity. The Blackwood bloodline had always been guardians. Today, she would prove why that legacy had endured for over 1,000 years. The real war was just beginning, and this time, she intended to win. But that, as they say, is a story for another day. The end.